At 1:53 in the morning, my home security alarm went off while I was sitting in a hotel room more than 200 miles away. A guard called and whispered, "Sir, a man is inside your house. He says he's the new owner." My wife froze beside me. On the live cameras, I watched my son-in-law walk straight to the basement, open my private office, and take the hard drive holding a devastating secret. But he didn't know I already knew everything, and every second of his betrayal was recorded. Thank you for being here. Before we start, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to protect someone from a truth they weren't ready to see? Leave a comment below. Your voice matters in this space. Quick note, some details are fictionalized to emphasize the lesson, but the core message is what I hope stays with you. The phone rang at exactly 1:53 in the morning, cutting through the silence of my hotel room like a knife. I was already awake, sitting in the darkness of the Whispering Pines Resort suite, with my laptop open, watching the security feed from my house 200 miles away in Brookline, Massachusetts. At 66, I had spent 40 years building gene trust diagnostics from nothing into a facility holding over 200,000 DNA records, and I wasn't about to let anyone steal it. Beside me, Corinne stirred as I reached for the phone. My wife of 42 years, 63 now, had been the lab's records manager when we first met. She knew what this call meant. "Mr. Prescott," the voice said with professional urgency. "Wayne Frost, 45, the night security supervisor here at the resort. Your home alarm just triggered. There's a man at your door, says his name is Bryce Whitfield, claims he's the new owner." The new owner. Interesting choice of words. "Let him in, Wayne," I said calmly. "Keep monitoring closely and make sure all the security cameras are recording everything." "Sir, you want me to—" "Yes, everything he does. All of it recorded." I pulled up the live feed from our Brookline house. Corinne sat up her hand, finding my shoulder. "Leland, what's happening?" Her voice was tight. "Should we call the police?" "Not yet," I said. "We need to let him finish what he came to do." Because I'd been expecting this for weeks. Bryce Whitfield, 40 years old, practiced charm that had fooled my daughter for 14 years. He'd appeared at our dinner table back in 2010 with too many questions about data security and laboratory access. Questions I'd found odd, but hadn't trusted my instincts about. I trusted them now. On the screen, the front door opened. Bryce stepped inside with complete confidence. He wasn't sneaking or hesitating. He moved through my home like he owned it, like he believed he already did. He walked past the living room, past the kitchen, where we'd hosted his wedding rehearsal dinner. He didn't pause to look around. He knew exactly where he was going. What Bryce didn't know was that I had been 3 steps ahead of him for months. The security upgrades I'd installed weren't just in my house. They were in the lab, in my financial accounts, in every digital corner of my life. Every login tracked, every unauthorized access logged. I'd spent 6 months building a case so airtight that even the best lawyer in Boston couldn't crack it. And here he was, walking right into it. "He's going to the basement," Corinne whispered. She was right. Bryce headed straight for the basement door, the one leading to my home office with backup drives and encrypted files. His hand went to the doorknob without hesitation. He'd been in that basement before. The realization should have made me angry. It would have 6 months ago when I first started to suspect. But I'd moved past anger into something colder, more calculated. Corinne's hand found mine in the darkness, cold with fear I no longer felt. On the feed, Bryce descended the stairs, his phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. "How long has he been planning this?" Corinne asked. "Years," I said. "Since before he married Alara. Maybe since the day he first asked about our encryption systems." Her breath caught. Our daughter hadn't been loved. She'd been a doorway into gene trust, into hundreds of thousands of medical records that someone would pay millions for. 14 years. Our granddaughter Wren was 12. Bryce had pretended to be a father, a husband, a son-in-law, all while planning to steal everything my family had built. On screen, he reached the basement and turned left, heading directly toward the locked filing cabinet. He didn't search. He knew. "How did he know where to go?" Corinne asked. Family dinners, holidays. Every visit was reconnaissance," I said. "He's been mapping this for years." Bryce knelt and pulled out lockpicks, working the cabinet with professional ease. Not his first break-in, but it would be his last. I opened a second window and pulled up my phone app, scrolling to a contact from 3 months ago. FBI Special Agent Conrad Bentley, Biomedical Crimes Unit. We'd had several conversations about data theft, industrial espionage, building a case strong enough for serious prison time. All I needed was proof, and Bryce was giving it to me one recorded second at a time. The filing cabinet opened. Bryce pulled out 3 hard drives, the ones I'd deliberately left there, the ones containing nothing but tracking software that would ping every time he accessed them. He slipped them into his jacket and stood turning toward the stairs with that confident stride. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what those drives would do the moment he tried to open them. No idea that every move had been recorded from 4 camera angles. No idea his phone's location was being logged, that his fingerprints were all over my filing cabinet, that the security system had sent alerts to 3 different monitoring services. I watched him go and smiled in the darkness, not a pleasant smile, but the kind that comes when you see a trap you've been setting for months about to spring shut. Bryce Whitfield thought he was stealing my life's work. What he was actually doing was handing me his. But to understand how we reached that moment, I needed to go back 14 years. The first time I met Bryce Whitfield, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know I was looking at the man who would try to steal everything I'd built. It was a cool October evening in 2010. Ilara had called that morning, breathless with excitement, asking if she could bring someone to dinner. At 22, she'd been my brightest protege in molecular biology, working in the Gene Trust lab with her mother's compassion and my stubborn determination to solve impossible problems. She'd just finished her undergraduate degree with honors and was about to start graduate school. She brought Bryce, 26 athletic build, expensive suit that looked casual but probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His handshake was firm, his smile perfect, his manners impeccable. "Mr. Prescott, it's an honor," he said, holding eye contact just the right amount of time. "Ilara speaks so highly of the work you're doing at Gene Trust." We sat down to dinner, roast chicken, Corinne's specialty. Small talk flowed easily. He asked about our daughter's childhood, laughed at my stories about her first science fair project, mentioned his work in business consulting, nothing alarming. Then between the main course and dessert, he leaned back in his chair and said, "So, the Gene Trust database uses dual redundancy storage, correct with the Sentinel encryption protocol." The room went quiet for half a second. Corinne glanced at me. Ilara smiled, oblivious. "That's remarkably specific knowledge for someone who's never been inside the lab," Bryce and I said carefully. He didn't miss a beat. "Oh, I just read about it somewhere. Biotechnology fascinates me, sir. The intersection of medicine and data security, it's the future, really. But here's the thing. Sentinel wasn't a standard encryption protocol. It was proprietary. We'd developed it internally, and the name appeared in exactly 3 places: our internal documentation, our patent filing, and a single trade publication that maybe 200 people in the country had read." "Where exactly did you read about it?" I asked. Bryce's smile never wavered. "One of those industry journals, I think. I read everything I can get my hands on." He turned to Ilara. "Your father's built something remarkable. You must be so proud." She beamed. "I am. Dad's teaching me everything about molecular genetics. Someday I'll run Gene Trust." Later that night after they had left, I mentioned it to Corinne. "He researched your company," she said, putting dishes in the sink. "He's trying to impress you because he cares about Ilara. That's what young men do." He knew the protocol name. "Leland." She turned to face me, drying her hands. "Our daughter finally brought someone home who makes her happy. Don't ruin it by being paranoid." So I didn't. I buried the unease and told myself Corinne was right. I watched them date, watched Ilara fall in love, watched Bryce integrate himself into our lives with careful precision, always helpful, always interested, always asking just the right questions about laboratory procedures and security systems and data storage protocols. They married in 2012. I walked my daughter down the aisle and handed her to a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. For the first year, Ilara stayed brilliant. She worked in the lab pursuing her doctorate, publishing papers, solving problems that had stumped researchers twice her age. I'd find her at her microscope at midnight, so focused she didn't hear me come in. "Dad, look at this sequencing result," she said one night in early 2012, her eyes bright with discovery. "This is exactly what we've been searching for." I looked over her shoulder at the data. She was right. It was perfect. "You're going to change the world," I told her. She smiled. "We're going to change it, together." How does a father watch his daughter's brilliance get systematically erased and do nothing to stop it? Because it happened so slowly, I almost didn't notice. First, Bryce suggested she cut back her hours. They wanted to start a family, and the lab work was stressful. Then he mentioned that her friends from graduate school were a bad influence, always encouraging her to prioritize work over marriage. Then he started managing their finances, handling all their accounts, making sure she didn't need to worry about money. By 2013, the fire in her voice had dimmed. She came to the lab less often. When she did, she seemed distracted, anxious. Bryce thinks I should focus on our family instead of the doctorate, she told me one afternoon, not meeting my eyes. He's probably right. The program is taking too much time away from Ren. Ren had been born 2 years before. My granddaughter, perfect and small. Ilara, I said carefully, is this what you want? Of course, but her voice was flat. I should be home more. Bryce is right. That was the last time I saw fire in my daughter's eyes, when she talked about science. She dropped out of the doctoral program, stopped publishing, stopped coming to lab meetings. When I called to ask her thoughts on a research problem, she'd say, "You should ask Bryce. He understands these things better than I do." Bryce, who had never worked a day in molecular biology, who couldn't tell a DNA sequencer from a coffee maker. But I said nothing, because every time I tried to raise concerns with Corinne, she'd say I was being overprotective, because Ilara seemed happy, or at least she said she was happy, because I didn't want to push her away. The last time I saw her in the lab was April 2014. She stopped by to drop off some old research notes she'd found at home, thought they might be useful. She stood in the doorway of my office in jeans and a sweater, no longer wearing the white coat with her name embroidered on the pocket. "I'll be home later, Dad," she said. "Bryce and I have plans tonight." "Let's come back soon," I told her. "We miss you here." She smiled a small, sad smile and said, "Maybe." She said she'd be home later that evening in 2014, standing in her white lab coat with her name still on the door. She never came back to the lab, and I never stopped waiting, never stopped hoping that someday I'd see that fire in her eyes again, when she talked about DNA, sequencing, and molecular structures. But I wasn't the only one watching our family closely. Someone else had been studying us for years, and I'd welcomed her into my home. Saskia Townsend appeared in our lives in 2016, a distant cousin in her mid-30s, with an overly bright smile and too many questions about rooms she'd never need to enter. She'd contacted Corinne through a genealogy website, explaining she was researching family history and wanted to reconnect with relatives she'd never met. "She seems lovely," Corinne said after Saskia's first visit. "So interested in the family." Interested. That was one word for it. Saskia visited regularly over the next 2 years. Always warm, always helpful, always asking questions that seemed innocent until you thought about them too carefully. "This Victorian basement is fascinating," she said during her third visit, standing at the top of the basement stairs with coffee in hand. "How many storage rooms down there? And that refrigeration unit, is that for your lab work?" "And just household storage," I said. "Why do you ask?" She laughed bright and practiced. "Oh, I'm thinking of renovating my own basement. Yours is so well organized. Do you mind if I take a quick look?" "One more, the pool steers buying," I minded. But Corinne was already leading her downstairs, chatting about the house's history. Saskia measured everything with her eyes. I watched her gaze linger on the refrigerated storage unit, on the locked filing cabinets on the security panel by the stairs. She asked about square footage, about the vintage of the house, about whether we'd had the foundation reinforced. Why would a distant cousin need to know the exact dimensions of our basement storage room? But when I mentioned my concerns to Corinne that night, she shook her head. "You're being paranoid again," she said. "She's family, and she's just curious about the house. You think everyone is suspicious. Maybe I did. Maybe years of protecting genetic data had made me see threats everywhere. But Saskia kept visiting, and her questions kept coming. She wanted to know our vacation schedules. When do you usually go to the Cape summer? Must be beautiful there. She asked about our security system. Is that one of those new wireless setups? I've been thinking about getting one. She inquired about our daily routines. Leland, do you usually work late at the lab? Corinne must get lonely in this big house. Ilara loved her. Saskia's been wonderful, Dad, my daughter told me during one of her rare phone calls. She even offered to house sit when we're at the Cape next month. Isn't that generous? Generous, or strategic. I started keeping notes. Every question Saskia asked, every room she showed interest in, every time she steered conversation toward our schedules or security, or the layout of the house. The pattern became clear. She was mapping us. mapping our home, our habits, our vulnerabilities. But I had no proof, just suspicion and a growing certainty that something was wrong. By 2018, her visits became less frequent. She'd gotten what she needed, I realized later. A complete blueprint of our lives. Now, 6 years later, I was watching that blueprint in action. On my laptop screen in the hotel room, Bryce moved through my house like a man following a memorized map. It was 2 a.m. The security cameras showed him in the high-definition grayscale, his figure dark against the familiar rooms I'd lived in for 30 years. "Look at him," I said to Corinne, who sat rigid beside me. "He's not searching. He knows exactly where he's going." Bryce walked past my desk in the study. $3,000 cash lay there in plain sight. Money I'd deliberately left out last week, testing a theory. He didn't even glance at it. He moved through the hallway past Corinne's jewelry box on the dresser. Her mother's diamond bracelet sat right on top, probably worth $15,000. He walked right by. "The basement," Corinne whispered. "He's heading straight for the lab storage." She was right. Bryce turned at the exact spot in the hallway where the basement door stood. No hesitation, no checking doors or looking around. He knew. Corinne's hand found mine in the darkness, and I felt her understand what I'd known for months. "As someone told him," she said quietly. "Yes. Saskia." I nodded. The pieces had been falling into place for half a year now, ever since I'd started tracking the unusual network activity around our home's security system. The login attempts on our family cloud storage, the way Bryce always seemed to know exactly when we'd be away. On screen, Bryce opened the basement door. The motion-activated lights didn't turn on. I'd disabled them remotely an hour ago, wanting to see if he'd brought his own light source, or if he knew the layout well enough to navigate in darkness. He pulled out his phone using its flashlight. Smart, careful, professional? He descended the stairs with confidence, his footsteps sure even in the dark. At the bottom, he turned left, not right toward the general storage, but left toward the section where I kept laboratory backup equipment. No one would know to turn left except someone who'd been down there, or someone who'd been told. "How long has this been planned?" Corinne asked, her voice barely audible. "Years," I said. "Since before Bryce married Alara. Maybe since the day he first walked into our house." Bryce reached the refrigerated storage unit, the one Saskia had asked about 8 years ago. He examined the lock, then pulled out a small toolkit from his jacket. Not lockpicks this time, something else. Wire cutters, maybe, or a bypass tool for electronic locks. "He's walked this route before in his mind," I said, watching him work. Someone drew him a map. Every movement was economical, practice precise. This wasn't a desperate man grabbing whatever he could find. This was an operation carefully planned and methodically executed. On the grainy security footage, Bryce walked past my desk with $3,000 cash lying in plain sight, past Corinne's jewelry box on the dresser, past everything of obvious value. He moved like a man following a memorized map, heading straight for the basement stairs without a single wrong turn. He didn't hesitate. He knew exactly where to go. Someone had told him. At 2:12 a.m., Bryce pulled out his phone in my basement and made a call that would confirm everything I'd suspected for months. I'd upgraded the security system last summer to include audio monitoring in the basement, told Corinne it was for detecting water leaks or furnace problems. Really, I'd been waiting for exactly this moment. On my laptop screen, Bryce stood beside the refrigerated storage unit phone pressed to his ear. The audio crackled through my computer speakers, tinny but clear enough. "I have it in sight," Bryce said, his voice low and urgent. "But if they change the access codes before I extract the files, this whole thing falls apart." A woman's voice responded, equally urgent. "You said you could do this, Bryce. We're running out of time. The buyer wants confirmation by Monday." The buyer. So it wasn't just theft, it was a sale. Someone was paying for my life's work for the genetic information of 200,000 people who had trusted Gene Trust with their most private data. Beside me, Corinne leaned closer to the laptop, listening intently. Then she went completely still. "And that's Saskia," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Leland, that's Saskia's voice. Our cousin." I nodded. I had known for 3 months since I'd started monitoring Bryce's phone records and found dozens of calls to a number registered under a shell company that traced back to Saskia Townsend. But hearing Corinne say it out loud, hearing her voice break on the word cousin, that made it real in a way the evidence hadn't. "I know," I said quietly. On screen, Bryce was speaking again. "I'm opening it now. If this is the right drive, I'll have it out of here in 5 minutes. Be careful," Saskia's voice said through the phone. "And Bryce, don't call me again until you're clear. We can't risk—" The call ended. Bryce slipped his phone back into his pocket and turned his attention to the refrigerated unit. Corinne's hand found my arm in the darkness, her nails digging in hard enough to hurt the physical proof that this nightmare was real. "She helped plan this," Corinne said, her voice shaking. "All those visits, all those questions about the basement and our schedules and the security system. She was mapping it for him." "Yes, she's family. We welcomed her into our home." "I know." Corinne pulled back, looking at me with something between shock and anger. "How long have you known—" 3 months, since I started tracking unusual network activity and found the connection. 3 months, and you didn't tell me. "I needed to be sure," I said. "And I needed you to react naturally when you saw them. If you'd known, you might have given something away." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned back to the screen. "We'd talk about this later. Right now, we had to watch." Bryce had the refrigerated unit open now. He reached inside and pulled out a hard drive about the size of a deck of cards sealed in protective plastic. The label read, "Gene Trust Primary Database Backup, Authorized Access Only." He held it up to the light, examining it like a jeweler appraising a diamond. Then he smiled, a genuine triumphant smile that made my stomach turn. He slipped the drive into his jacket pocket, zipped it closed, and headed for the stairs. "He's leaving," Corinne said. "Leland, he's getting away." Good," I said. She turned to me, confused. "Good." I watched Bryce climb the basement stairs, move through the hallway, and exit through the front door. He paused on the porch for just a moment, looking over his shoulder at the dark house, then walked quickly to a car parked 3 houses down. Not his car. I recognized it as Saskia's silver sedan. How long had I been planning this moment, preparing for the night my son-in-law would finally reveal himself completely? 3 months since I'd confirmed my suspicions. 6 months since I'd first started noticing the pattern. But really, I'd been preparing since that first dinner in 2010, when Bryce asked about the Sentinel encryption protocol. I'd just been waiting for him to make his move. "He's walking out like he just won the lottery," I said, watching the car pull away from the curb. Corinne grabbed my arm again, harder this time. "Should we call the police now? Stop him before he gets away?" I closed the laptop and turned to face my wife in the darkness of our hotel room. "That hard drive is a fake I prepared 3 months ago," I said calmly. "It contains nothing but tracking software and decoy files. Every move he makes from now on, we'll know." Corinne's mouth opened, then closed. "A fake—" I moved the real database to a dual storage system at the lab in October. What Bryce just stole is a perfect replica down to the label and serial number. But the moment he tries to access those files, the drive will activate GPS tracking, keystroke logging, and automatic backup uploads of every attempt he makes to decrypt or transfer the data. "You've been planning this for 3 months, she said slowly. "Longer, but I needed him to commit. I needed him to break in, make the call, take the drive, prove intent. Now, I have everything." "Everything for what?" "Everything to destroy him," I said, "and everyone working with him." Corinne was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Does Alara know?" "No," I said. "And she can't. Not yet. If she knows, Bryce will know. And I need him to feel safe for a while longer." "How much longer?" "Until I have enough evidence to ensure he goes to prison for a very long time. Until I can prove not just theft, but conspiracy, corporate espionage, sale of protected medical data to a foreign buyer." I looked at Corinne in the dim light from the window. "Until I can show our daughter exactly who she married." Bryce walked out of my house at 2:31 a.m., carrying the hard drive like it was made of gold, looking over his shoulder once before disappearing into the night. He thought he'd just stolen the crown jewels Gene Trust's database of 200,000 DNA records worth millions. What he'd actually taken was the key to his own cage embedded with tracking software that would document his every betrayal. I couldn't let Corinne believe what just happened was lucky timing. She deserved to know I'd been planning this moment for 3 months. We stood on the resort balcony at 3 in the morning, the lake invisible in the darkness below us, the air cold enough to see our breath. Inside the hotel room felt too small, too close. Out here, at least, we had space for the conversation I'd been dreading. "I've suspected Bryce for 3 months," I said, not looking at her. "Since October, when I caught anomalies in the lab access logs. Someone with administrative privileges was running searches on our security protocols, encryption methods, backup storage locations. The kind of searches someone would run if they were planning to steal data." Corinne was quiet for a long moment. 3 months. Yes. Everything I've seen since then. Her voice caught. The forgetfulness. Forgetting Wren's birthday. The trembling hands. Leaving the stove on. All of it. Theater, I said quietly. All of it was theater. She stepped back from the railing, and I felt the distance open between us like a physical thing. You let me worry about your health for 3 months. Her voice was tight with anger now, with hurt. Made me think I was losing you to dementia. How could you do that to me? Because I needed your reactions to be genuine, I said, finally turning to face her. If you'd known it was an act, Bryce would have seen through it. He's been watching us closely, looking for any sign of weakness, any opportunity. I had to convince him I was declining, that I was vulnerable. And to do that, I had to convince you first. You used me. I protected you, I said. By keeping you in the dark about the performance, I kept you safe from becoming part of the lie. Your worry was real, your reactions were genuine, and that's exactly what sold it. I'm sorry. I hated every moment of it, but it was the only way. Corinne wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. What else haven't you told me? I moved the real database to a dual storage system in November, installed tracking software on every backup drive, upgraded the security cameras to include audio, started documenting every unusual access attempt, every suspicious query. I paused. And I hired an attorney. When? December, a specialist in medical data fraud. I needed to understand the legal implications before I let Bryce steal anything, even a fake. Corinne's hand, which had pulled away in anger, slowly returned to mine on the cold railing, forgiveness without words. I wish you'd trusted me, she said quietly. I trust you with my life, I said. But I couldn't trust Bryce not to see through you if you were acting. Your genuine fear for my health, that's what made him believe the timing was perfect to make his move. She squeezed my hand once hard, then let go. What happens now? Now, I said, we build a case strong enough to ensure he never gets close to our family again. The sun rose over Lake Placid 3 hours later. By 9 a.m., I was driving south toward Boston. Adrienne Dalton's office occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower in the financial district. She'd agreed to see me on a Saturday morning, which told me she understood the urgency. At 48, she'd built a reputation as one of the country's leading attorneys in biomedical fraud cases, someone who'd seen corporate theft destroy lives and knew exactly how to fight it. Her office smelled of expensive coffee and old law books. She reviewed my evidence with clinical precision, the fake hard drives tracking logs, screenshots of the access anomalies audio recordings of Bryce's phone call, with Saskia documentation of the security system upgrades. Mr. Prescott, if your son-in-law had successfully accessed this database, we're looking at potential damages exceeding $20 million, she said, setting down the first folder. Not counting the liability exposure for 200,000 clients whose genetic information would have been compromised. 20 million, the number hung in the air between us. I know it's valuable, I said, but I need to understand the legal exposure here. What exactly are we dealing with? Adrienne picked up a second folder, thicker than the first. That's before we discuss federal charges. Unauthorized access to genetic data protected under federal health privacy laws. Conspiracy to sell protected medical information to a foreign entity that's corporate espionage with biomedical implications. The attempted theft alone puts this in federal jurisdiction. When does a family betrayal cross the line from personal hurt into federal crime? Federal, I repeated. Yes. She leaned back in her chair, studying me over her reading glasses. This isn't a civil matter we can handle in Massachusetts courts. The moment your son-in-law attempted to access and steal genetic data with intent to sell it internationally, he crossed into FBI Biomedical Crimes Unit territory. FBI? Yes, and the penalties are severe. We're talking 10 to 15 years federal prison for the data theft alone. More if we can prove conspiracy with this Saskia Townsend, more still if we can identify the foreign buyer he mentioned on that phone call. I sat back absorbing this. I'd known it was serious. I'd known Bryce was committing crimes, but hearing it laid out in federal terms and years of prison time made it real in a way my own investigation hadn't. What do we do next? I asked. We document everything, Adrienne said. Every time he tries to access that fake drive, every communication with his accomplices, every move he makes. And then when we have enough evidence to guarantee conviction, we bring in the FBI and we take him down completely. She closed the folder containing evidence of Bryce's attempted theft and looked at me over her reading glasses with the expression of someone delivering a diagnosis. "Mr. Prescott, your son-in-law isn't just stealing from you or even just from your company. He's committing federal biomedical crimes, unauthorized access to protected genetic data, conspiracy to sell medical information to a foreign entity. We're not talking about civil court. We're talking about the FBI." 2 weeks after watching Bryce steal the fake hard drive, I stood in Gene Trust's server room, watching my forensic analyst pull apart the system that nearly cost me everything. Adrienne had been right about needing digital forensics. The fake drive would show us where Bryce tried to go with the stolen data. But first, we needed to understand exactly what he'd already done to our systems, how deep the breach went, how long it had been happening. Desmond Greer arrived on a Tuesday morning with 3 equipment cases and the quiet intensity of someone who'd spent 20 years hunting digital ghosts. At 52, he was a former NSA analyst turned private cybersecurity investigator, specializing in corporate espionage. The first person I'd called after Adrienne confirmed we needed someone who understood how professionals operated. "Server room first," he said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "Physical access points before we dive into the digital forensics." Silas Fox met us there. At 29, he was my lead forensic data analyst at Gene Trust, and the first to notice the unusual login patterns back in October that had triggered my entire investigation.
He'd been working late that night, running routine security checks, when he spotted access attempts that didn't match any authorized user's behavior pattern.
The server room hummed with the white noise of cooling fans and electrical current. Desmond moved methodically through the racks, examining every connection point, every cable bundle, every possible place someone might hide something. It took him 40 minutes to find it. "Mr. Prescott," Silas called from behind the main server rack. "I found something." I moved around the rack to where he was crouched, pointing to a small black device no bigger than a deck of cards tucked among the cable bundles, and nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "Small data copying device attached to the back of our main server," Silas said, his voice tight. "Professional grade, not off-the-shelf equipment." Desmond joined us, pulling out a magnifying glass and examining the device without touching it. "Whoever placed this knew exactly what they were doing. This is corporate espionage hardware, the kind intelligence agencies use. Military-grade encryption, self-powered, designed to be undetectable." He looked at me over his shoulder. "Let me pull the logs." It took another hour to carefully extract the device and connect it to Silas's isolated forensic workstation. I watched the data populate across the screen, timestamps, file transfers, connection logs. Numbers that told a story I didn't want to read. "The device has been active for 11 months, Desmond said, scrolling through the logs. "First connection established March 2023. He's been bleeding your data since last March, 7 months before you even suspected him." 11 months. Bryce had been inside my system since spring, while sitting at my dinner table hugging my granddaughter, pretending to care about my health. While Alara told us about Wren's school plays and summer plans, her husband was systematically copying our genetic database in small, undetectable increments. "How much did he get?" I asked. "Fragments," Silas said, analyzing the transfer logs. "He couldn't pull everything at once that would trigger automatic alerts, so he took pieces. A few hundred records here, a few thousand there. Spread over 11 months, it looks like normal system activity." "How much total?" Silas calculated quickly. "Approximately 43,000 partial records. Not enough for a complete database, but enough to prove to a buyer that he had access to the real thing. 43,000 people's genetic information, their medical histories, their ancestry data, their most private biological secrets, copied and stored somewhere I couldn't control, couldn't protect." There's more," Desmond said, pulling up another screen. The device logs show the installation timestamp, March 14th, 2023 at 11:47 p.m. Building was closed. Security logs show... He paused, checking something. "Building security logs show your son-in-law signed in at 11:30 p.m. that night. Said he was dropping off your granddaughter's birthday present for you to find in the morning." I remembered that morning, Wren's birthday, a carefully wrapped package sitting on my desk when I arrived. A painting she'd made with a note from Bryce saying he'd dropped it off late so it would be a surprise. While I was sleeping 20 miles away, Bryce was in this room, installing professional espionage equipment on my servers. "Show me the remote access logs," I said. Silas pulled up a different screen, and I watched months of attempted intrusion scroll past. 47 unauthorized login attempts over 11 months, all from the same IP address. He was methodically mapping your entire system architecture, testing encryption vulnerabilities, looking for backdoors. How close did he get? I asked. Silas was quiet for a moment, running calculations. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Based on his penetration progress and testing patterns, I estimate he was approximately 3 weeks from breaking through your encryption when you caught the October anomaly. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Mr. Prescott. He was 3 weeks away from getting everything. What would have happened if I'd waited even one more month before investigating those October anomalies? If I'd dismissed them as system glitches, told myself I was being paranoid, like Corinne always said. If I'd been on vacation when Silas noticed the pattern, or too busy with other lab work to pay attention. 3 weeks, the difference between catching him and losing everything. Silas turned his screen toward me, showing a timeline graph with Bryce's penetration attempts climbing steadily toward Gene Trust's encryption threshold. The red line representing his progress nearly touched the green barrier representing our security in early October, exactly when I'd first noticed something wrong. And this line here, Silas said, pointing to where the red and green almost met. That's when your encryption would have failed. He'd have had complete access to everything. All 200,000 records, all the raw genetic data, all the research, everything. I stared at the screen at how close those two lines came to touching. 3 weeks. If I'd dismissed those anomalies as system glitches, if I'd waited even a month longer to investigate, Bryce would have had everything. The digital theft was devastating enough. But what the forensic accountant found in Bryce's financial records made me realize this wasn't just about stealing data. It was about selling my family. 3 weeks into the investigation, I sat in Adriane's conference room on the 14th floor of her Boston office, looking down at the financial district below. Marshall Hoffman sat across from me, a forensic accountant in his 50s, who specialized in tracing offshore money laundering. He'd spent 2 weeks reconstructing Bryce's hidden financial trail, following digital breadcrumbs through shell companies and international wire transfers. Desmond and Adrienne flanked me at the table. None of us had touched the coffee. Mr. Prescott, Marshall said, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. I've traced $340,000 in wire transfers to your son-in-law's escrow account over 8 months from a Singapore-based biotech corporation called Genome Corp International. $340,000. The number sat in my mind like something physical and heavy. 8 months, I repeated. Starting when? May 2023. Marshall opened the folder to show a spreadsheet with dates and amounts. The transfers were structured at $9,800 each to stay under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Classic money laundering technique, keep everything just below the radar. I looked at the numbers, transfer after transfer twice a month, like clockwork, each one carefully calibrated to avoid triggering automatic reports to federal authorities. Adrienne leaned forward, pulling out a second document. The transfers were structured to hide them, but this is the damning part. She slid a contract across to me. Bryce signed a purchase agreement to deliver your complete database by February 2024 for $2.5 million total. The room went very quiet. $2.5 million, I said. Total, Adrienne confirmed. The $340,000 was the deposit. 20% upfront balance due on delivery of what the contract calls complete genetic profiles for minimum 200,000 verified subjects with full medical histories and ancestry data. I stared at the contract. It was printed on professional letterhead, formatted like any legitimate business agreement, terms and conditions, payment schedules, delivery requirements, as if selling stolen genetic information was just another corporate transaction. He sold data he hadn't stolen yet, I asked. Took their money and spent 8 months trying to actually get what he'd already promised them. Exactly, Marshall said. Based on the payment timeline and the copying device logs, Desmond found Bryce received the first deposit payment in May 2023, 2 months after installing the device. He's been taking their money while simultaneously trying to steal enough data to fulfill the contract. Desmond pulled up something on his laptop. The fake hard drive you prepared has GPS tracking and transaction monitoring built in. We've been watching Bryce's attempts to access it for 3 weeks now. He's tried 17 different decryption methods, contacted 3 different black market data recovery services, and made 4 attempts to sell samples to verify authenticity. Samples of fake data, I said. Right, which means he's getting desperate. February deadline is 3 weeks away, and he still doesn't have the complete database he promised. I thought of the 200,000 people who had trusted Gene Trust with their genetic information, cancer patients seeking early detection, markers, prospective parents wanting to understand hereditary risks, adopted children searching for biological family people looking for answers to mysterious symptoms their doctors couldn't explain, and Bryce had sold them for $1,700 each. $1,700 per human life reduced to data. What would Genomic Corp International do with this information? I asked. Adrienne exchanged glances with Marshall. That's where it gets worse, she said. Marshall traced the corporation's ownership structure. Marshall pulled out another document. Genomic Corp International is a shell company registered in Singapore, but owned by a pharmaceutical research firm in Shanghai. They specialize in developing targeted drug therapies medications designed for specific genetic profiles. They want to develop drugs for the American market. Desmond said, using genetic data from Americans without going through any regulatory approval or consent process. They'd have a massive head start on understanding which populations respond to which treatments. Using stolen data, I said. Using stolen data. Adrienne confirmed. And because the data came from Gene Trust, which serves primarily upper-middle-class Americans willing to pay for premium genetic testing, it's an incredibly valuable demographic sample. Educated, health-conscious, financially stable, exactly the population pharmaceutical companies want to target. The deposit alone, $340,000, was more than most people earned in a decade, and Bryce had spent it while still trying to steal what he'd already sold. Where did the money go? I asked. Marshall flipped through bank statements. Down payment on a vacation property. New car for Saskia Townsend, your distant cousin and apparent accomplice. Luxury expenses. He burned through $200,000 in the first 6 months. And he still owes them a complete database he doesn't have, I said. Which is why the alarm night happened, Adrienne said. February deadline approaching, buyer getting impatient, Bryce getting desperate. The fake hard drive in your basement was supposed to be his salvation. He thought he'd finally get everything he needed in one night. Instead, he stole a GPS tracker, Desmond said with grim satisfaction. I looked at the payment schedule spreadsheet Marshall had prepared. $340,000 received. $2.16 million still due on delivery. A timeline of payments going back 8 months. A contract that treated human genetic information like a commodity to be bought and sold. This elevates everything, Adrienne said quietly. International sale of protected medical data, conspiracy with foreign entity, fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, corporate espionage, biomedical trafficking. She met my eyes. The FBI is going to be very interested in this. I stared at the contract spreadsheet showing the payment schedule, $340,000 deposit received, $2.16 million, due on delivery of complete Gene Trust database. Bryce had reduced 200,000 human beings' most intimate biological information, their disease risks, their ancestry, their genetic futures to a commodity worth $340,000 in his pocket. That's what our family's medical secrets, our clients' trust. 26 years of my life's work was worth to him. The financial evidence told us what Bryce was selling, but it was my 72-year-old neighbor who showed me just how long he'd been planning the theft. Otis Redmond lived 3 houses down from us, in a modest colonial with security cameras that covered half the street. A retired postal worker he'd kept meticulous records with, the same attention to detail he'd brought to 30 years of mail routes. When I knocked on his door that Thursday afternoon, he was already pulling up files on his computer. Mr. Prescott, I keep detailed logs for Neighborhood Watch, he said, gesturing me into his small den. Your son-in-law's car appeared on this street 9 times in the past 3 months, always after 11 p.m., always just watching. 9 times. I sat down heavily in the chair he offered. You're certain it was him? Otis pulled up a spreadsheet alongside grainy security footage. License plate matches, and look, he parks down the street, sits there 10 to 15 minutes studying your house, then leaves. Never approached, just surveillance. I logged every date and timestamp. The first entry was October 15th, 2023, 11:43 p.m. Bryce's car, a dark sedan parked 4 houses down, with a clear view of my front entrance. The timestamp ticked forward as I watched the footage 12 minutes of him just sitting there in the darkness watching my house. I thought it was odd, Otis said, clicking through to the next date. Man visiting his in-laws wouldn't park down the street at midnight. He'd pull into the driveway, use his key if he had one. This was different. October 22nd, November 5th, November 18th, December 2nd. Each visit followed the same pattern late-night arrival, parking at a distance 10 to 15 minutes of observation departure without ever approaching the house. What was he watching for, I asked, though I already knew. Patterns, Otis said. When your lights went out, when you left for work, when the house was empty. Look at this one. December 9th. He arrived at 11:30, sat there until your bedroom light went out at midnight, then left 3 minutes later. 9 times Bryce sat in the darkness outside my home, watching learning planning while I slept, thinking my family was safe. The last visit was the January 6th. Otis said, pulling up the final entry. 2 weeks before your alarm went off. He sat there for 20 minutes that time, longer than usual, like he was making final preparations. I stared at the footage at my son-in-law's car sitting in the shadows of my neighborhood, studying my home like a predator watching prey. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked. I almost did several times, but he was family, and I thought maybe he was just... Otis shook his head. I convinced myself there was an innocent explanation, that maybe he was having marital trouble and sitting outside thinking. I didn't want to cause problems in your family over what might be nothing. It wasn't nothing, I said quietly. No, Otis agreed. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I thanked him, copied all the footage and logs to a drive, and left with 9 more pieces of evidence showing systematic, calculated planning. But the reconnaissance wasn't just Bryce's work. 2 days later, I sat across from Emma Carlisle in a booth at Carmine's Cafe in Brookline Village. At 24, she was an elementary school teacher now, but she'd babysat Ren during her college years, exactly the period when Saskia had first started her visits to our home. I always thought it was odd how much Saskia asked about the house when she visited. Emma said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. Which rooms were downstairs where you kept important things when your family took vacations? At the time, I figured she was just curious, maybe thinking about buying a similar house. But looking back, it wasn't curiosity, I said. No. Emma looked uncomfortable. There was one visit in particular, fall of 2017. Saskia came over while I was watching Ren. She seemed really interested in seeing the basement, said something about Victorian architecture, asked if she could look around. And I told her sure, just be careful on the stairs. She went down, was gone maybe 5 minutes. When she came back up, she was putting her phone away. I felt cold. You said she photographed something, the basement staircase, the storage area. I saw her come up, and she was sliding her phone into her pocket. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she'd just been texting someone, but... Emma paused. I'd seen the screen for a second when she pulled it out. It was her camera app, Mr. Prescott. She'd been taking pictures of the basement entrance and storage area. She used my granddaughter as a child as cover to photograph my basement like some kind of spy operation. Why didn't you say anything? To who about what? Emma looked miserable. She was family, a distant cousin taking pictures of a basement during a family visit. What was I supposed to accuse her of? It felt weird, but I couldn't articulate why. And Ren was right there, so it's not like Saskia was doing anything dangerous or inappropriate around her. I felt uneasy, but didn't trust the feeling enough to make it a thing. Did she ask anything else? She wanted to know your routines, when you usually went to bed, when you left for the lab in the morning, whether you traveled much. She framed it all as friendly concern. Oh, Leland works so hard, does he ever take breaks? Or, you all should take more vacations. When was the last time the house was empty for more than a weekend? Emma shook her head. Every question sounded innocent by itself. It's only looking at them all together that the pattern becomes clear. I sat in that cafe booth staring at Emma, understanding finally how deep the conspiracy ran. Saskia hadn't just asked innocent questions or made friendly conversation during babysitting visits. She'd used those sessions, used my granddaughter's presence as cover to photograph the basement, to map the storage areas, to gather the exact intelligence Bryce needed for his break-in. She was mapping my house through my granddaughter's babysitter, exploiting a child's trust to steal from her grandfather. I thought I understood how Bryce had isolated my daughter, but Alara's closest friend was about to show me the invisible cage my daughter had been living in for years. Briar Valencia agreed to meet me in the Massachusetts General Hospital parking lot at dusk. At 37, she worked as an ER nurse and had been Alara's nursing school roommate and closest friend before my daughter disappeared from that life into Bryce's isolation. I hadn't seen Briar in nearly a decade, not since she'd stopped being invited to family gatherings, her calls to Alara going unanswered, the friendship slowly strangled by distance Bryce had carefully engineered. She stood beside her car in Scrub's arms crossed against the February cold, looking older than I remembered, tired, like someone who'd spent years carrying a secret that weighed too much. "Thank you for meeting me," I said. "I should have reached out sooner," she said without preamble. "Should have told you years ago. But Alara made me promise not to, and she shook her head. "I thought I was respecting her wishes. Now I think I was just a coward." "Tell me," I said. Briar looked out over the parking lot, watching the evening traffic. 6 months ago in July, Alara called me at 2 a.m. sobbing. She said, "I'm afraid of him, Briar. I'm afraid of what Bryce might do to me." She was terrified in a way I'd never heard, and I've heard a lot of fear working ER for 10 years. My chest went tight. Did she say what happened? Did he hurt her? She wouldn't give details, just kept saying she needed help, that she'd made a terrible mistake marrying him, that she didn't know how to get out. I begged her to leave that night to pack Ren and come stay with me. Told her I'd help her file for divorce, restraining order, whatever she needed. Briar's voice cracked. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I stayed on the phone with her for an hour until she calmed down enough to promise she'd call me in the morning to make a plan. "But she didn't," I said, knowing how this story ended. "She did call, but the next morning, it wasn't Alara, not the one I knew. This flat, calm voice like someone else was speaking through her. She said she'd overreacted, that Bryce had just been stressed about work, and she'd taken it personally, that everything was fine, she was sorry for worrying me, it wouldn't happen again." Briar turned to look at me, her eyes wet. "That scared me more than the crying Mr. Prescott. Because that flat voice wasn't your daughter processing emotions. It was someone who'd been told exactly what to say. That morning, call the calm, flat voice retracting her fear, was the sound of my daughter disappearing into psychological captivity. "I tried calling her after that," Briar said. "Multiple times. She never answered. Eventually, Bryce called me back. From her phone said Alara didn't want to talk to me anymore, that I was causing problems in their marriage. I haven't heard from her since." I stood in that hospital parking lot as understanding finally that the theft wasn't the worst thing Bryce had done. The worst thing was what he'd done to my daughter's mind, her sense of safety, her ability to ask for help and believe she deserved rescue. "Thank you for telling me," I said. Briar nodded. "Stop him, whatever it takes." 2 days later, I sat in Adriana's office while Silas pulled up files on his laptop, with the grim efficiency of someone who'd uncovered something deeply wrong. "Mr. Prescott Bryce's background has inconsistencies," Silas said. "His identity doesn't completely match what he's told your family about his past. Employment history, education, records there are gaps that don't add up." "What kind of gaps?" Adrian slid a folder across her desk. "The kind that made us dig deeper. We found a pattern. 4 years ago in Cincinnati, Rebecca Hartman Pharmaceutical Company owner's daughter. 2-year relationship with a man matching Bryce's description. Same physical features, same charm-focused approach. He pursued her, aggressively integrated himself into her family, asked detailed questions about her father's patent portfolio. What happened? The company was acquired by a larger corporation. Patents became inaccessible, locked in the new parent company's vault. 1 week later, Bryce, or whatever name he was using, then vanished. No explanation, no goodbye. Rebecca never filed charges, just ended the relationship on paper and tried to move on. How many other women had Bryce studied, targeted, and abandoned when their family's assets proved inaccessible? "We're still investigating whether there are others," Silas said, as if reading my mind. "But this establishes pattern. He targets intelligent women connected to valuable biotech intellectual property, builds long-term relationships, gains family access, studies the assets, and when he sees an opportunity, or when the assets become unreachable, he either executes the theft or disappears. He's done this before Mr. Prescott," Adrian said quietly. "Same method, same predatory approach. Alara wasn't his first victim, she was just his most valuable target yet. I thought of my daughter at 22, brilliant and kind, meeting a charming 26-year-old who seemed fascinated by her work in molecular biology, who asked all the right questions about her father's laboratory, who integrated himself into our family with practiced precision. He hadn't fallen in love with Ilara, he'd selected her. Rebecca Hartman, I said. Can we contact her? We tried, Adrian said. She declined to speak with us. The experience was traumatic enough that she doesn't want to revisit it even to help build a case against him. Silas pulled up a photograph. This is her from a 4-year-old Society page article about her father's company. I stared at the image. Rebecca Hartman looked eerily similar to Ilara at that age. Same intelligent eyes, same kind smile, same gentle features. Bryce had a type, and it wasn't about love or attraction. He targeted brilliant women connected to valuable biotechnology assets. Ilara wasn't his first victim, just his most valuable target yet, worth $2.5 million in promised payments from Genomi Corp International. Learning that Bryce was a professional predator was devastating, but discovering he was just a pawn in a much larger game made me realize how far this conspiracy truly reached. Adrienne called me into her office the next morning, with the kind of urgency that meant she'd uncovered something that changed everything. Desmond was already there, his laptop open, his expression grim. Intelligence from our monitoring contacts confirms Genomi Corp knew the hard drive was fake. Mr. Prescott, Adrian said, without preamble. They knew from the beginning it contained worthless bait data. I sat down slowly. Then why continue paying Bryce $340,000? Why maintain the transaction for fake data? Invested extabistan. Because Bryce was never their real asset, he was their probe. Desmond pulled up intercepted communications on his screen. They're using him to test whether Gene Trust's actual security can be breached, mapping vulnerabilities in American genetic databases. He's expendable, a disposable pawn testing your defenses. Adrienne leaned forward. The fake hard drive you prepared had GPS tracking and access monitoring. We've been watching Bryce try to decrypt it for 5 weeks now. But Genomi Corp has been watching too, analyzing his methods, studying your security responses, mapping how Gene Trust protects its data. They're not just buying stolen information, I said, understanding crystallizing. They're conducting reconnaissance on American biotech security infrastructure. Exactly. And Bryce has no idea. He thinks he's a successful corporate spy selling valuable data. Genomi Corp knows the data is worthless, but continues paying him because his attempts to access it reveal exactly how your real systems are structured. Every failed decryption attempt shows them what doesn't work. Every security measure that blocks him teaches them what to avoid next time. And next time, I repeated. You think they'll try again? Not try, Adrian said quietly. They're already planning. Our contacts intercepted communications discussing Phase 2 deployment once the current probe has mapped sufficient infrastructure vulnerabilities. Bryce isn't their endgame, he's their test run. My son-in-law wasn't just a thief or even a predator. He was an unwitting tool in an international conspiracy to breach American genetic privacy. How many other probes do they have out there? I asked. How many other companies are being tested right now? We don't know, Desmond admitted. But Genomi Corp's parent company in Shanghai has connections to at least 4 other biotech firms across the U.S. If they're using Bryce's method on all of them, they'd have a complete map of American genetic database security. So I finished. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every backdoor. Adrienne nodded. The FBI needs to know about this. It's beyond corporate espionage now. This is systematic intelligence gathering on protected American medical infrastructure by a foreign entity. I thought about Bryce sitting in his home office trying desperately to decrypt fake data, thinking he was outsmarting me. He had no idea he was just a disposable piece in a game so much larger than family betrayal. There's something else you need to know, Adrian said. About Ilara. She arranged another meeting with Breyer Valencia. This time, a week later in mid-February, we met in the same hospital parking lot at dusk. You asked me to think about the extent of Bryce's control. Breyer said, her breath visible in the cold air. I've been thinking about it for 6 days. Mr. Prescott, Ilara doesn't control anything, not her phone. Bryce monitors every call and text message, not her bank accounts. He's the only one with passwords and access to their money. Not her relationships. He filters everyone who tries to contact her. How long has this been going on? I asked. 14 years, the entire marriage. It started small. Let me handle our finances, honey. You focus on Ren. Then it expanded. Your old friends are so negative they don't understand our family. Then tighter. Why do you need your own phone password? We're married, we should trust each other. Each restriction presented as care, as partnership, as love. I felt sick. She never fought back. She tried. That's what the 2 a.m. call was, a moment of fighting back. But he has systems in place to crush resistance, financial dependence, social isolation, constant monitoring, and, Breyer paused, her voice breaking. The worst part. 2 years ago, he changed her email password. It changed it. She doesn't even have her own email password, can't access her own account. He changed it and never gave it back to her. No email password, such a small thing. But it meant my daughter couldn't apply for jobs, couldn't reach out for help, couldn't exist digitally without his permission. Why would he do that? I asked, though I already knew. Complete control, Breyer said. Think about it. Without email access, she can't reset any of her other passwords, can't create new accounts, can't communicate privately with anyone. Every digital interaction has to go through systems Bryce controls. She's trapped in a technological cage where he holds all the keys. She's been living like this for 2 years, since 2022, longer. But that was when the cage door finally closed completely. Before that, she at least had email. Could theoretically reach out, apply for jobs, maintain some digital autonomy. After he took that, Breyer shook her head. She told me once during that 2 a.m. call that she felt like she didn't exist anymore, not as a person with her own identity, just as an extension of Bryce living whatever life he permitted her to live. I stood in that parking lot as the sun set over Boston, understanding finally the complete extent of what Bryce had done. He hadn't just stolen data or targeted my daughter for her family connections. He'd systematically erased her, her independence, her identity, her ability to exist as a separate human being with her own thoughts and connections to the world. Breyer's voice cracked as she described the full extent of Alara's captivity. No access to her own bank accounts, no independent phone, all friendships filtered through Bryce's approval. But the detail that shattered me was this. 2 years ago, Bryce changed Alara's email password and never gave it back. My brilliant daughter, who once conducted groundbreaking molecular biology research, couldn't even access her own email account. Armed with everything I'd learned about Bryce's conspiracy, I sat down to dinner with my family and began the most important performance of my life, pretending to lose my mind. Knowing that my daughter had been stripped of her email password, her bank access, her digital existence gave me the rage I needed to make every calculated mistake look genuine. This wasn't just theater, it was warfare disguised as decline. I'm sorry, what was your name again? I asked Bryce midway through the main course, looking at him with what I hoped was confused concern. Brian? No, Brett. I know it starts with B. Bryce's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. It's Bryce, Mr. Prescott. We've been family for 14 years now. 14 years. I fumbled with my water glass, letting my hand tremble just enough to look uncontrolled, but not so much it seemed theatrical. Has it been that long? Time moves so strangely now. Across the table, Ilara's face crumpled with worry, real genuine heartbreak at watching her father decline. That look nearly broke my resolve, but it also made the performance more convincing. Corinne reached over and steadied my hand, playing her role perfectly. Leland, you asked that same question 5 minutes ago, she said with practiced concern. Maybe we should schedule that appointment with Dr. Peterson like Bryce suggested. Dr. Peterson. I let confusion cloud my face. Why would I need, yes, the memory tests. I set down my fork with exaggerated care. What year is this again? 2024, Daz, Ilara said softly. February 2024. 2024, I repeated as if testing the number. That can't be right. Wasn't it just... I trailed off, shaking my head. I'm sorry, I lose track sometimes. Ilara excused herself to check on Ren, who was eating in the kitchen doing homework. The moment she left, Bryce leaned forward, slightly studying me, with the focused attention of someone evaluating an investment. How's work been at the lab? He asked. Any big projects I should know about, see? I blinked at him slowly. The lab. Yes. We're working on... I paused, pretending to search for words. What were we working on? Corinne. The sequencing project. No, that was years ago. You mentioned the encryption upgrade last week, Bryce said helpfully. Too helpfully. Something about new security protocols. Did I? I shook my head. I don't remember discussing that. Are you sure? Every calculated mistake I made at that table, every confused look, every trembling hand, it was revenge served, cold disguised as dementia. After dinner, I fumbled with signing a check for the catering service, my handwriting deliberately shaky. Bryce watched me struggle with the pen, and I saw him pull out his phone, typing something quickly. Probably to Saskia, I thought, reporting that the old man was declining faster than expected. Later, after Bryce and Alara had left, after I'd repeated the same story about my first day at Gene Trust, twice within 10 minutes, to sell the performance, Corinne and I sat in our bedroom in the darkness. You were convincing, she said quietly. Too convincing. Did you see Alara's face? She's heartbroken. She thinks she's losing you. I better she thinks that than knows the truth, I said. If she knew, Bryce would know, and we need him confident. Corinne was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, before the wedding in 2010, I saw something I never told you. I turned to look at her in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Bryce was going through Alara's handbag when she went to the kitchen. Corinne continued, her voice shaking. Really going through it, wallet, phone papers. Not just glancing, searching. I saw it from the doorway and he didn't see me watching. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Or tell her. Corinne's face crumpled. Because I convinced myself it was innocent. That maybe he was looking for her chapstick to give her, or checking if she had her keys. That I was being a paranoid mother-in-law, seeing problems where there weren't any. I didn't want to ruin her happiness over what might be nothing. How many moments of silence, of looking away from uncomfortable truth, does it take to lose your daughter? I told myself I was being crazy. Corinne said, tears streaming down her face now. That young couples share everything, that it was normal for him to go through her things. That speaking up would make me the villain who didn't trust her judgment. So I said nothing. That one moment of silence, of looking away, cost our daughter 14 years of her life. I reached for her hand, not to comfort exactly, but to share the weight. I saw things too, I admitted. That first dinner, the way he asked about Gene Trust's security protocols before he'd even been to the lab, the way he studied the house layout when he thought no one was watching. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that Corinne was right and I was just an overprotective father who couldn't accept anyone was good enough for his daughter. We both saw it, Corinne whispered. We both looked away. She turned to me in the darkness, her face wet with tears. If I'd spoken up that day, if I'd pulled her aside and said, I saw him going through your purse and it worried me, would she have listened? Would it have changed anything? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe she would have defended him. Maybe it would have driven her closer to him, made her pull away from us. Or maybe she would have seen it too, Corinne finished. Maybe one warning, one voice telling her something was wrong, would have been enough to make her pause, to look closer, to not marry him. We sat in silence, carrying 14 years of what-ifs between us. Corinne sat on the edge of our bed, with her face in her hands, 14 years of guilt, finally spoken aloud between us. I'd seen Bryce's calculating questions about Gene Trust at that first dinner in 2010. She'd seen him rifling through our daughter's handbag before the wedding. We had both seen it, the predator studying his prey, testing boundaries, searching for weakness. We had both looked away, choosing hope over instinct, silence over confrontation. And our daughter paid the price for 14 years. A week after our midnight confession, Bryce arrived at our door carrying the documents that would legally give him everything if I was foolish enough to sign them. Corinne and I sat in our living room on a gray February afternoon, watching Bryce spread papers across our coffee table with the careful precision of someone who'd rehearsed this presentation many times. Alara sat beside him, her face lined with worry I'd put there with my performance. Mr. Prescott, given your recent memory difficulties, Alara and I prepared guardianship documents ensuring you'll always have proper oversight and care. Bryce said, his voice warm with manufactured concern. It's the responsible thing to do. I picked up the papers with deliberately shaky hands, letting my eyes scan the legal language I understood perfectly. Guardianship, power of attorney, medical directives, and buried in the middle, in careful legal terminology that most people would miss, complete operational control of Gene Trust diagnostics, including authority to sell assets, access all accounts, make binding business decisions on my behalf. If I signed this, I would lose everything legally. No recourse, no appeal. Bryce would own my life's work by proxy, and I would have handed it to him willingly. Dad, this isn't about control, Ilara said earnestly, reaching across to touch my hand. It's about protecting you. The papers let Bryce help manage Gene Trust and your care when you're having difficult days. She believed every word. That was the most heartbreaking part. My daughter genuinely thought she was helping me by facilitating her own betrayal. There's so much legal language here I don't understand, I said, playing confused and overwhelmed. What exactly happens if I sign this? Bryce leaned forward, his smile patient. It simply means that when you're having memory difficulties like forgetting names or getting confused about dates, I can step in and handle the business decisions you'd normally make. Gene Trust keeps running smoothly. Your clients stay protected, and you don't have to worry about making mistakes that could hurt the company. Those papers weren't guardianship, they were a complete transfer of power disguised as love. We've also researched some excellent memory care facilities. Bryce continued pulling out a second folder. Nothing immediate, of course, but when the time comes, we want to be prepared with the best options. Memory care facilities. He was already planning where to put me once he had legal control and didn't need to maintain the charade anymore. Before I reveal what Ren had been painting all those months, I need to ask, are you still with me? Comment A if you think a child's artwork could become evidence, or B if that crosses a line. Please note, what follows includes some adapted details for emotional impact, but the core truth is what matters. I need time to think about this, I said, setting the papers down with trembling hands that weren't entirely an act. The rage made them shake. Of course, Bryce said smoothly. Take all the time you need. We just want what's best for you. After they left, I stood at the window watching their car pull away. Corinne came to stand beside me. He actually brought guardianship papers, she said quietly. Oh, the final stage, I confirmed. Get my signature, gain legal control, then do whatever he wants with Gene Trust. Sell it to the highest bidder, probably the Shanghai Corporation through Genome Corp. What are you going to do? Refuse to sign, but carefully. Can't refuse too quickly or too competently, or the performance falls apart. That afternoon, I went to check on Ren in her art studio. She'd been spending more time there lately, painting with the focused intensity she'd inherited from her mother's scientific mind. The room smelled of watercolors and paper afternoon light streaming through the windows. That's when I saw them. Paintings lined the walls and covered the floor, watercolors in various stages of completion, all showing the same scene. Shadowy figures in dark spaces, a man and woman embracing. The garage, different lighting, different angles, but always the same intimate posture. Ren, I said carefully, my voice catching. What are these? She looked up from her easel with the innocent smile of a child proud of her work. This is Daddy and Miss Saskia by our garage grandpa. They hug a lot when I'm playing outside. The shadows look so pretty I kept painting them. The room tilted slightly. How many times have you seen them together like this, sweetheart? Ren stood walking to the paintings arranged along the wall like a gallery exhibition. She counted carefully, touching each one. 17 times. See, I made a painting each time because the light was different. Morning shadows are blue, afternoon ones are gold, evening ones are purple. 17 paintings, 17 times. My granddaughter watched her father betray her mother and thought it was beautiful enough to paint. Is that a special adult game they play? Ren asked innocently. I knelt down beside her, struggling to keep my voice steady. When did you start painting these? Last summer, June. I think they started meeting in the garage a lot. I thought it was nice that Daddy had a friend to hug. She picked up one of the paintings, examining her own brushwork with critical 12-year-old eyes. This one's my favorite. See how the sunset made their shadows really long? I looked at the painting in her hands, two figures intertwined, rendered in the gentle watercolors of a child who didn't understand what she was documenting. Each painting was dated in careful handwriting, spanning 8 months. June through January. 17 separate instances. 17 times she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have seen and painted it because she didn't know what betrayal looked like. They're beautiful paintings, Ren, I managed to say. Very detailed. You're a talented artist. She beamed. Thank you, Grandpa. I try to capture exactly what I see. That's what real artists do, right? That's exactly what real artists do, I said, my throat tight. I took photos of every single painting with my phone, making sure to capture the dates written in Ren's handwriting. 17 pieces of evidence created by a 12-year-old who thought she was just painting pretty shadows. Ren spread her watercolors across the studio floor. Like a gallery exhibition, 17 paintings of the same scene in different light shadowy figures, embracing intimate and secret, rendered in the innocent brushstrokes of a 12-year-old who thought she was capturing pretty shadows. She showed me 17 drawings, each one dated in careful child's handwriting, spanning 8 months. 17 times she had seen something a 12-year-old should never see and painted it because she didn't understand what betrayal looked like. I was still staring at the 17 paintings when Ren turned back to her art supplies, humming softly as she organized her colored pencils by shade. That's when she said it, casual, distracted. The way 12-year-olds mention finding pennies or interesting rocks. "Oh, Grandpa, I forgot I found this little black thing in Dad's jacket pocket a few weeks ago. I thought it was like a tiny robot or something." She held up a small USB drive between her paint-stained fingers. "Is it yours?" The world stopped. The USB drive was barely bigger than her thumbnail, black and unremarkable, the kind you could buy at any electronics store. But I knew with absolute certainty what I was looking at. "Where did you find this?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully calm. "In Daddy's jacket," Ren said, examining the drive with mild curiosity. "I was looking for candy in his pockets. He usually has mints, and I found this instead. I thought it was a toy at first, like a little robot piece or something. So I kept it." "When was this?" She shrugged. "A few weeks ago, maybe longer. I've been keeping it in my crayon box because it was the perfect size to fit." "A few weeks, maybe longer." My granddaughter had been carrying what was likely the most damning piece of evidence against her father in a box of colored pencils, completely unaware. "Can I see it?" I asked, extending my hand. Ren handed it over without hesitation. "Is it important I can give it back to Daddy if he needs it?" "No," I said quickly. "Don't mention this to him. Let me check if it's something I need for work first, okay?" "Okay, Grandpa." I turned the USB drive over in my palm. Standard storage device, no labels, no markings. The kind of anonymity that screamed intentional. This could be nothing, a backup of family photos, old documents, random files. Or it could be everything. I called Silas from the studio, my voice tight. "I need you at my house. Now, bring your forensic laptop." "What's wrong?" "Just come, please." He arrived 30 minutes later with his equipment bag. I led him to my home office away from Ren and showed him the drive. "Where did you get this?" Silas asked, pulling on latex gloves before touching it. "My granddaughter found it in Bryce's jacket pocket weeks ago. She's been keeping it in her art supplies, thought it was a toy." Silas's expression went very still. "Weeks ago." "Yes. We need to analyze this immediately." He connected the USB to his isolated forensic laptop, the same one he'd used to analyze the fake hard drive I'd planted. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, running security checks, examining file structures, mapping the drive's contents. How long had it been there? How many times had she reached past it for a blue pencil? A red crayon, completely unaware she was touching the thing that would unravel her entire family. I watched Silas work each passing second, stretching longer than the last. His expression shifted from professional concentration to something harder, sharper. "Talk to me," I said. "The drive is encrypted," he said. "Military-grade encryption, same type we saw on the copying device. But," he paused typing commands. "There's a secondary partition, poorly hidden like it was meant to be found eventually. What's on it?" "Give me a minute." The office fell silent, except for the soft clicking of keyboard keys and the hum of the laptop. Outside the window, afternoon light was fading into evening. Somewhere in the house, Ren was probably still organizing her colored pencils, completely unaware that the little black thing she'd found had been the missing piece of everything. Silas stopped typing, leaned closer to the screen, then sat back in his chair with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. "Mr. Prescott," he said quietly, "this is it. The actual stolen data. The real database. Not the fake we planted, not fragments from the copying device. This is the complete Gene Trust DNA database, all 200,000 records, full medical histories, complete genetic profiles, unencrypted backup files. Everything." I wanted to tell Silas to stop, to close the laptop, to say the drive was corrupted, empty, useless. Anything but the truth that was about to appear on that screen. "You're certain?" "I'm looking at it right now. File timestamps show it was compiled in early January, right before your alarm went off. This is what Bryce was supposed to deliver to Genome Corp International, the $2.5 million product he'd already taken a deposit for. And he lost it, I said, understanding finally. That's why he broke in. That's why he took the fake drive from my basement. He'd already stolen the real data, compiled it onto this USB, and then lost it. Lost it in his own jacket pocket, Silas confirmed, where your 12-year-old granddaughter found it looking for candy. I sat down heavily in my office chair, the full weight of the discovery settling over me. Bryce had successfully stolen Gene Trust's complete database, had it ready to deliver, and then misplaced it in his own clothing, so desperate to find it that he'd broken into my house looking for any backup copy he could deliver instead. My granddaughter had been carrying the crown jewels of genetic data in her crayon box, thinking it was a robot toy. At the fake drive we gave him, I said, he's been trying to decrypt that for weeks, getting more desperate, making more mistakes. And the whole time, the real data was in your house, Silas finished, in a box of colored pencils. I thought of Ren reaching past that USB drive every time she drew, every time she painted. The innocent randomness of a child deciding to keep something shiny she'd found. The cosmic joke of Bryce's most successful theft, being undone by a 12-year-old looking for mints. What do we do with it? I asked. Document everything, Silas said. Chain of custody forensic analysis proof that this is the actual stolen database. Then we hand it to the FBI as evidence. Along with the paintings, the financial records, the surveillance footage, the fake drive tracking data, we give them everything. My 12-year-old granddaughter had been carrying the evidence that would destroy her father in a box of colored pencils. The evidence that my granddaughter had been carrying in her crayon box was about to become the FBI's problem. Conrad Bentley's badge reflected the overhead light as I slid the USB drive across his desk. FBI Special Agent mid-40s Biomedical Crimes Unit Adrienne had said he'd spent 20 years tracking corporate data theft and knew exactly how to build airtight federal cases. This is everything, Conrad asked, examining the USB with gloved hands. 200,000 DNA records. Desmond confirmed from his seat beside me. Complete genetic profiles, medical histories, everything. Plus, active GPS tracking on the decoy hard drive he stole from Mr. Prescott's basement. I'd brought the complete package to Adrienne's conference room that afternoon. The USB from Ren's crayon box, the fake hard drive still pinging location data every time Bryce tried to access it. The physical copying device we'd found on Gene Trust's servers. Otis's surveillance footage showing 9 reconnaissance visits. Bank statements documenting payments from Genome Corp International. Emma's testimony about Saskia's basement photographs. Breyer's account of the terrified phone call. Ren's 17 paintings. Everything. Conrad spread the evidence across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle that had finally come together. Account transfers totaling $340,000 from a Singapore shell company. Unauthorized server access logs spanning 11 months. Physical espionage hardware. Attempted sale of protected medical data to foreign entity. He looked up at me. Mr. Prescott, this is one of the most complete cases of biomedical corporate espionage I've seen in 2 decades. Can you prosecute? I asked. We can prosecute, Conrad said. Federal charges, multiple counts, consecutive sentencing. But we'll need 48 hours to position surveillance properly. Don't approach him. Don't confront him. Let us build the operational framework. Understood, I said. Adrienne pulled out another folder. There's something else you should know about Saskia Townsend. Her involvement is already documented, I said. Not her involvement, her motivation. Adrienne opened the folder to reveal old employment records termination as documents, police reports from 2004. Saskia's mother, Sandra Townsend, worked at Gene Trust for 3 years. You fired her in June 2004. I remember, I said. She was selling client files to a competitor. We found evidence filed, a police report terminated her immediately. As Sandra Townsend sold 300 client files for $8,000, Adrienne said quietly. The evidence was ironclad email records, financial transactions testimony from the competitor who bought the information. She was caught, fired, and the case was settled to avoid criminal prosecution on condition she leave the biotech industry entirely. So what's the issue? And Saskia doesn't know that, Adrienne said. Based on everything we've uncovered, Saskia believes her mother was wrongfully terminated, that you destroyed an innocent woman out of paranoia or corporate politics. I stared at the police report from 20 years ago, at Sandra Townsend's name on the termination paperwork. Sandra told her daughter she was wronged. Apparently, yes. Saskia's been carrying that story her entire adult life, that you ruined her mother for no reason, that Gene Trust owed her family a debt. It's why she was so willing to help Bryce. In her mind, she wasn't stealing. She was taking back what should have been hers. 20 years of resentment built on a story that never happened. Does that change the charges against her? I asked. No, Conrad said. Intent matters in sentencing, but not in guilt. She still participated in corporate espionage, still helped map your security, still facilitated the attempted theft. But it adds a layer of... He paused, searching for the right word. Tragedy. She's not just a criminal. She's someone who was lied to and weaponized. I fired a thief, I said quietly. Saskia thinks I destroyed an innocent woman. She probably always will, Adrian said. Even if we show her the evidence, even if we prove Sandra lied, people don't easily let go of stories they've believed their whole lives. I left Adrian's office with Conrad's instructions echoing in my mind. 48 hours. Don't approach. Let them build the case. But I had one more piece of theater to perform. 2 days later, I staged the fall. Corinne and I had choreographed it carefully. Late afternoon bathroom, a stumble against the sink that left a real bruise on my hip, and a convincing limp I didn't have to fake. Corinne's panicked call to Ilara, voice shaking with genuine fear, because even though she knew it was staged, seeing me actually fall had terrified her. Ilara, your father fell, Corinne said into the phone, her voice tight. He's okay, but I think we need to talk about what happens next. He wants to see everyone, you, Bryce, Wren, a family meeting. I could hear Ilara's concerned response through the speaker, asking if we should call an ambulance if I needed to go to the hospital. No hospital, Corinne said. But he's been asking for the whole family. Tell her I want everyone there, I whispered from my chair loud enough for Ilara to hear. I'm afraid he doesn't have much time, Corinne added, her voice breaking. He just keeps saying he wants everyone together one more time. How many times can you betray someone who still calls you family? Through the phone, I heard Bryce's voice in the background, muffled at first, then clearer, as he apparently took the phone from Ilara. Corinne, it's Bryce. When do you want us there? This weekend, Corinne said. Saturday afternoon. We'll be there, Bryce said. His voice carried something I recognized now, barely contained satisfaction disguised as concern. Tell him not to worry. We'll make sure everything is taken care of. After Corinne ended the call, we sat in silence. He sounded eager, she said quietly. He thinks this is it, I said. The accelerated timeline he's been hoping for. Elderly father, declining rapidly, calling family together for final arrangements. In his mind, I'm about to either sign those guardianship papers or die and trigger the inheritance process. And instead, he's walking into a room full of evidence with federal agents positioned outside. That week, Bryce called Ilara twice more. I knew because she mentioned it during a concerned check-in call, telling me how supportive her husband was, being how he'd encouraged her not to miss the family meeting, how he'd rearranged his entire schedule to make sure they could attend. You should go, Bryce had told her each time. Your father needs you. He called Ilara himself to make sure she came. He thought he was hurrying the endgame. He was right, just not the way he imagined. The endgame Bryce imagined started unraveling the moment he tried to access that fake hard drive. Conrad showed me the logs 3 weeks after surveillance began. 47 failed attempts to access a file that would never open. We sat in a small FBI monitoring station, watching digital traces of Bryce's increasing desperation scroll across screens. Conrad, Silas, and I had been meeting weekly to review the surveillance data, watching the trap work exactly as designed. He's tried 7 different machines, Silas said, tracking the activity timestamps. Each time the file corrupts on access. Desktop at home, laptop borrowed, computer at a coffee shop, even tried a machine at a public library. The file structure is designed to look intact during initial scan, I said, watching the log entries. Only fails when he tries to actually open or transfer the data, which makes him think it's his equipment, not the file itself, Conrad added. So he keeps trying. The fake hard drive had been a masterpiece of digital theater. The bootable file was deliberately corrupted in a way that appeared fixable, encouraging Bryce to try harder, to reach out for help, to document his intent with every attempted transfer. And he had. He called the corporation 4 times yesterday, Conrad said, pulling up phone surveillance logs. Promised delivery by week's end. They're getting impatient. What's he telling them? Technical difficulties, encryption issues. He's making excuses, but they're losing faith. The last call got heated. They threatened to recall the deposit payments if he doesn't deliver soon. I looked at the financial tracking data. Genomi Corp International had already paid Bryce a substantial sum for data he couldn't deliver. Now they wanted results. Every call, every account transfer, every desperate message, it's all documented, Silas said. We have recordings, IP addresses, financial transactions. Federal prosecutors are going to have everything they need. Every failed attempt was another nail in his case. Every call, another piece of evidence. Every hour brought him closer to prison and Alara closer to freedom. When do we move? I asked. Today, Conrad said. Family meeting this afternoon as planned. We have agents' position surveillance active. The moment you give the signal, we come in. I looked at the screens showing Bryce's frantic attempts to access files that would never open to deliver data he'd already lost to his own daughter's crayon box. All his careful planning, 11 months of systematic theft, reduced to failure by a 12-year-old looking for candy. He has no idea, I said. None, Conrad confirmed. He thinks he's walking into a family meeting to accelerate guardianship paperwork. He has no idea we've been watching him for weeks, that we have the real USB, that every move he's made has been documented. I left the monitoring station and drove home through the gray February morning. The family meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock, 3 hours from now. Corinne was in the kitchen when I arrived, standing by the window with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She didn't turn when I entered. She's going to hate us, Corinne said quietly, still looking out at the winter garden. Probably, I admitted pouring my own coffee. She'll think we destroyed her marriage, her family, her daughter's father. She won't understand that we're trying to save her. She already chose him over us. I said, sitting down at the kitchen table we'd shared for 42 years. At least this way she'll be free to choose again. Corinne finally turned to look at me, her eyes red. And if she never forgives you, I thought about that. Really thought about it. My brilliant daughter, who'd once conducted groundbreaking molecular biology research, reduced to a woman without her own email password. My Alara, who'd called her friend at 2 a.m, terrified, then retracted everything the next day. The daughter who'd disappeared into Bryce's control so completely that she couldn't see the cage he'd built around her. What does a father owe his daughter, protection from the truth or protection from the lie? At least she'll be free, I said. Corinne sat down across from me, her coffee untouched. I keep thinking about what Breyer said, that morning phone call when Alara retracted everything, that flat, calm voice like someone else was speaking through her. I know. She's been trapped for 14 years, and we're about to blow up her entire world in front of her. Show her that the man she married, the father of her child, is a predator who selected her like a mark. That every question he asked, every interest he showed, was calculated manipulation. Yes, I said simply. She might never recover from that, Corinne said. The psychological damage of learning your entire adult life was a lie. Is still better than spending another 14 years in that lie, I finished. Corinne, she has no email password. She can't access her own bank accounts. She lives in complete digital captivity, and he's made her believe that's love. If we don't do this today, she'll never get out. And if she hates us for it, I reached across the table and took my wife's hand. Then at least she'll be free to hate us, free to feel anything other than what Bryce tells her to feel. Corinne's tears fell silently into her coffee. We sat there in our kitchen in the house where we'd raised our daughter, where we'd welcomed Bryce into our family 14 years ago, where we'd ignored warning signs and chosen hope over instinct. This time, we were choosing differently. FBI has everything, I said. Surveillance, financial records, the real USB testimony documentation. Conrad says it's one of the most complete cases he's seen in 20 years. Will that be enough? For a conviction? Yes. For Alara to understand why we did this. I shook my head. I don't know. The kitchen clock ticked toward noon. 2 hours until the family meeting. 2 hours until we destroyed our daughter's world to save her life. I love her, Corinne said. Even if she never speaks to me again, I need you to know that. This is because I love her. I know, I said. Me too. We finished our coffee in silence, watching the winter light move across the kitchen we'd shared for 4 decades. Soon this room would be filled with our family, Ilara Bryce Wren. Evidence would be revealed, the FBI would enter, everything would change. At least she'll be free, I said, and I meant every word, even knowing it might cost me my daughter. Bryce arrived 20 minutes early, carrying a leather folder embossed with a law firm's logo. I watched him through the conference room window as he stepped into Gene Trust's lobby, his movements deliberate and confident. He wore a charcoal suit I'd never seen before, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie. This wasn't the casual son-in-law who stopped by for Sunday dinners. This was a man dressed for victory. Desmond stood beside me, his expression neutral. "He thinks he's already won," he said quietly. "That's good," I replied. "Let him." The conference room had been prepared exactly as I'd requested. The long table positioned so anyone sitting at the far end would have their back to the massive wall-mounted screen. My seat at the head, Desmond to my right. The laptop connection already tested twice this morning. Bryce entered first, alone. Noelle arrived 10 minutes later, her eyes red-rimmed, her hand trembling as she set down her purse. She wouldn't look at me. Wouldn't look at him either. "Thank you both for coming." I began settling into my chair. "I know this has been difficult." Bryce opened his leather folder with practiced ease. "Leland, I want you to know that Noelle and I have agonized over this decision." His voice carried the perfect tone of reluctant concern. "But given the recent incidents, we believe it's time to discuss transitional planning for Gene Trust's leadership." He slid a document across the table. Medical guardianship papers. My name at the top, several blank signature lines at the bottom. "We've consulted with specialists." Bryce continued, his eyes meeting mine with manufactured sympathy. "The episodes you've been experiencing, the confusion, the memory lapses, they're only going to get worse. This isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about protecting what you've built." Noelle stared at her hands, silent. I picked up the document, scanned the first page. Language about diminished capacity. Phrases like, "unable to manage complex business decisions," and "requires oversight for his own protection." "I see," I said, "and you'd take over operational control." "Temporarily," Bryce said smoothly, "just until we can establish a proper management structure. Noelle would be the legal guardian, of course, but I'd handle the day-to-day business operations. The databases, the client accounts, the storage drives," I finished. Something flickered across his face, brief, almost imperceptible. "All of Gene Trust's assets," he corrected. "For your protection, Leland, and for the protection of 200,000 clients who trust you with their most personal information." I set the document down. "Desmond, do you have those files I asked you to prepare?" "Right here." Desmond opened his own folder, but didn't remove anything yet. I nodded to Desmond. The screen behind me lit up. Bryce's confident expression shifted slightly as he glanced past my shoulder. The first image appeared timestamp-marked security footage showing a figure in dark clothing kneeling beside Gene Trust's basement server room door, manipulating the lock. "What is this?" Bryce asked, his voice tight. Noelle looked up, her eyes widening. "Security camera footage," I said calmly. "From November 19th. That's you, isn't it?" Bryce breaking into my basement server room at 2:47 in the morning. The next image appeared, enhanced, zoomed, his face clearly visible in the infrared camera's glow. "This is ridiculous," Bryce said, but his hand had moved to his collar, loosening his tie slightly. "I've been in your basement dozens of times. You've given me access to—" "Not to the server room," Desmond interrupted, his voice sharp. "That door requires biometric authentication. There are exactly 3 people with access, Leland, his head of IT security and the backup administrator. You're not on that list." The screen continued its automatic progression. Phone records showing 47 calls between Bryce's cell and a number registered to Saskia Harlow. Bank statements highlighting the $340,000 deposit into Bryce and Noelle's joint account dated 2 weeks before the first break-in attempt. Screenshots of the encrypted USB drive's contents, Gene Trust's complete client database, 200,000 DNA profiles ready for sale. "Where did you—" Bryce started, then stopped himself. Noelle was staring at the screen now, her face pale. "Bryce," she whispered, "tell me this isn't real." He didn't answer her. The images kept coming. The keystroke copying device found in my office desk, its serial number, traced to a purchase made from Bryce's credit card. Login attempt logs showing 47 failed password entries on my private database account, all originating from Bryce's laptop IP address. Text messages between him and Saskia discussing the old man's codes and timing the extraction. Image after image, dollar after dollar, lie after documented lie. "This is fabricated," Bryce said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "You can't possibly someone setting me up. Leland, you have to see that someone is trying to drive a wedge between our family." I leaned forward. "The copying device has your fingerprints on it, Bryce. The FBI verified that yesterday." His face went white. "The what?" Noel's voice cracked. "Your husband has been attempting to steal Gene Trust's complete client database." Desmond said, his tone clinical. 200,000 DNA records with a black market value estimated between $18 and $22 million. He's been working with a data broker named Saskia Harlow. The $340,000 was her advance payment. Bryce stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this. Noel, we're leaving." But Noel didn't move. She was staring at him, tears streaming down her face. "Tell me it's not true," she said. "Look at me and tell me." The screen changed one final time. Not an image now. A waveform visualization appeared, and Desmond pressed a key on his laptop. The room went completely silent. On the screen, Bryce's own voice filled the air. "If we don't get the storage drive before access codes change, the whole plan falls apart." Conrad Bentley walked through the door, as Bryce's recorded voice still echoed in the room. The FBI agent moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who'd already won. Behind him came Adrian Dalton and Silas Fox, each carrying a leather portfolio stamped with federal seals. Conrad's credentials appeared in his hand before anyone could speak. Special Agent Conrad Bentley, FBI Biomedical Crimes Unit. He said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Bryce Whitfield, you're under federal investigation." Bryce stood frozen, his hand still gripping the back of his chair. The color had drained from his face, leaving him pale against the dark fabric of his expensive suit. "This is a private family meeting," Bryce managed, but his voice came out hollow. "You can't just—" "We have a warrant." Adrian stepped forward, setting her portfolio on the conference table. She opened it with precise movements, revealing page after page of documentation. Medical data fraud, conspiracy to commit theft of intellectual property valued between $18 and $22 million, illegal financial transactions with a foreign corporation totaling $340,000. Silas opened his laptop without a word. The wall screen that had just displayed Bryce's crimes now filled with a new presentation, Federal Forensic Analysis. Encrypted file structures, money transfer routes traced through 3 countries, communication metadata linking Bryce's devices to Saskia Harlow's network. "Every transfer attempt documented," Silas said quietly. "Every call recorded, every dollar traced." Bryce's eyes darted between the screen and the agents, his breathing shallow. "The recording was illegal. You can't use—" "The recording was made by a private citizen on private property with proper consent." Desmond interrupted, his attorney's voice precise. "Completely admissible, but the FBI doesn't need it." Conrad moved closer to Bryce, his expression neutral. "The hard drive you've been trying to access for 3 weeks was designed to fail. Every panic attack, every failed login, every desperate attempt to force the encryption you documented yourself." I watched understanding hit Bryce like a physical blow. The basement server room had been theater. The hard drive I'd left in my desk drawer, the one he'd copied, the one he'd spent 3 weeks trying to crack, had been bait. Not just bait, a recording device. Every keystroke logged, every access attempt time-stamped, every moment of his desperation captured in federal forensic detail. "You," Bryce's voice cracked. "You planned this, all of it." "We provided the opportunity," Conrad said. "You provided the crime. 3 weeks of documented panic. 47 failed attempts, every single one building the case that would destroy him." Noelle hadn't moved since the agents entered. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Bryce, her face unreadable. She'd been crying earlier, but the tears had stopped. Now she just watched him, like he was a stranger. Bryce turned to her, suddenly desperately. "Noelle, you have to understand. I did this for us, for our future. Your father was going to let Gene Trust die. Don't," her voice came out flat, "don't say my name. Everything I did was to protect what should have been ours, what he should have given you years ago, instead of hoarding it like—" "Stop." But something in Bryce had broken. Cornered, exposed with federal agents standing between him and any possible escape, The mask he'd worn for 14 years finally shattered completely. "You want to know the truth, Noel?" His voice rose sharp with desperation and rage. "You were just a door." The room went absolutely silent. "A door I needed to walk through to get to the system." He continued, the words tumbling out like poison. "That's all you ever were, a means of access. The daughter of the man with 200,000 DNA records and no understanding of their real value. Just a door." Noelle's face didn't change. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't move at all except for her hands, which slowly uncurled in her lap. 14 years, Bryce said, laughing now, a sound completely void of humor. 14 years of playing the devoted husband, the supportive son-in-law, the man who gave a damn about your little problems and your father's outdated ethics. Do you know how exhausting that was? "Mr. Whitfield," Conrad said, his voice carrying a warning. "The first time I met you at that pathetic graduate student mixer, I already knew exactly who you were. Leland Prescott's daughter, the one who'd inherited access to everything." Bryce turned back to Noel, his eyes wild. "You made it so easy, so grateful for attention, so desperate to be chosen." I stood slowly, every muscle in my body coiled tight. Desmond's hand on my arm stopped me from moving closer. "Bryce," Adrian said sharply, "anything you say—" "I know my rights," he snapped. "And she deserves to know. You all deserve to know. I played this perfectly for over a decade. Every birthday, every holiday, every tedious family dinner, I earned this." Noelle stared at her hands. They lay open on the table in front of her, pale and still, as if they belonged to someone else. Someone she didn't recognize. "The only mistake," Bryce continued, his voice dropping to something cold and precise, "was underestimating the old man. I thought he was too principled to set a trap, too honest to lie. Turns out he was just better at it than I was." "Mr. Whitfield, you need to stop talking," Conrad said, but he didn't move to stop him. None of the agents did. They just stood there, letting him destroy himself further with every word. Noelle finally looked up, not at Bryce, at me. Her eyes held something I'd never seen there before. Not anger, not grief. Something hollower than either. The look of someone trying to remember who they'd been before they learned their entire life had been a performance staged by someone else. "Dad," she whispered, "did you know about the door?" I shook my head. "Not until 3 weeks ago. 14 years. She said so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I was a door for 14 years. She didn't cry. She just looked at her hands as if trying to remember who she had been before she became someone's door. Desmond's phone buzzed as Conrad was reading Bryce his rights. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting slightly. Without a word, he angled it toward me. A text message from an unknown number, but the content made the sender clear. He knew about Portland. I read aloud, quiet enough that only Desmond heard. Evidence of what happened there. Said he'd ruin me if I didn't help him. I'm sorry. I was afraid. That doesn't make it right, but I was afraid. Saskia Harlow, sending her confession from whatever holding cell or federal vehicle she now occupied. Desmond's jaw tightened. Blackmail on top of everything else. I handed the phone back. Some people are broken by what happens to them. Others break themselves trying to prevent it. "Which one is she?" "Both," I said, "and it doesn't change what she did." Bryce was standing now, hands behind his back as Adrian secured the restraints. He'd stopped talking, finally, his face blank, all the desperate rage drained away. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The expensive suit couldn't hide it. "The corporation's accounts are frozen," Conrad said, addressing me directly now. "Genome Corp International, the offshore entities, all of it. The lab is completely secure. 200,000 DNA records," Adrian added. "Protected. No data left the country." I nodded. The relief should have felt bigger, sharper. Instead, it settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold, and utterly without triumph. They led Bryce toward the door. He didn't look at Noelle as he passed, didn't look at anyone, just stared straight ahead, his movements mechanical. Noelle sat exactly where she'd been since his confession, hands in her lap, eyes unfocused, breathing so shallow I had to watch carefully to see her chest move. The front door opened, closed, car doors slammed outside, engines started. Desmond touched my shoulder briefly. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "Make sure she's not alone tonight." "I won't." He left with the agents. Then it was just the two of us in the conference room that had held so many ordinary meetings over the years. Budget reviews, hiring decisions, strategic planning sessions. Now it felt like a battlefield after the fighting stopped. Empty. Echoing. I walked to the window and watched the federal vehicles pull away from the curb. 3 cars, Bryce in one, Saskia presumably in another. The afternoon sun caught the windshields, turning them to mirrors. Victory was supposed to feel different than this. Justice doesn't heal, it just stops the bleeding. I turned back to Noelle. She hadn't moved. "The coffee's probably cold," I said, gesturing to the untouched cups on the table. "I can make fresh." She didn't respond. I sat down across from her in the chair Bryce had occupied. When he'd arrived with his leather folder and his manufactured concern, the folder still sat on the table, medical guardianship papers. I pushed it aside. Noelle. Her eyes focused slowly like someone surfacing from deep water. "How long have you known?" Her voice was flat, empty. 3 weeks since I had proof, I said. Longer since I suspected. How much longer? A year, maybe more. She absorbed this silently. Her hands hadn't moved, still lying open on the table, palm up, as if waiting for something to fill them. Why didn't you just tell me?" The question I'd been dreading since the moment I'd decided to set the trap, instead of simply confronting Bryce directly. "How do you tell your daughter that saving her meant letting her believe a lie long enough to see the truth?" "Because you had to see it for yourself," I said. "If I'd told you, if I'd come to you with suspicions or even evidence, what would you have done?" She started to answer, then stopped. Understanding crept across her face. Painful understanding. "You would have confronted him," I continued quietly. "You would have asked him to explain, given him a chance to defend himself, and he would have had an explanation ready. He always did. You would have believed him because you loved him, because 14 years of your life depended on believing him. You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because I'm your father and I know you. You're loyal. It's one of the best things about you. It's also what made you vulnerable to someone like Bryce." Her face crumpled slightly, but still no tears came. "So you just let me keep living with him, sleeping next to him, believing..." She couldn't finish. "If I'd told you and he'd suspected, I knew you would have been in danger," I said. "Real danger. A man stealing $18 to $22 million in genetic data doesn't leave witnesses who know too much, especially not witnesses he's already gotten what he needs from." She flinched. "I had to build the case completely before he knew I was building anything. Had to get the FBI involved, get the evidence documented, get everything locked down so tight he couldn't run or retaliate. And I had to do it without telling you, because I would have defended him." She finished, her voice barely audible. "Even knowing what he'd done, some part of me would have tried to find the explanation that made it not as bad as it looked." "Yes, and you would have lost me both ways." She looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "That's what you said before. Both ways." I nodded. "If I'd told you and you'd believe me, Bryce would have known and you'd be in danger. If I'd told you and you hadn't believed me, if you'd chosen him over what I was telling you, I would have lost you anyway. This was the only way to get you back. By letting me hear him say I was a door. By letting you see exactly who he was, not through my words, through his own." She pressed both palms flat against the table, staring at them again. 14 years, she whispered. "I don't know who I am without those 14 years. I reached across the table and covered one of her hands with mine. "You're my daughter. You're brilliant and loyal and stronger than you know. You've always been those things. He didn't create them, and he can't take them away." Her fingers curled slowly around mine, not gripping, just holding on, a connection in the emptiness. "I don't feel strong," she said. "I know," I replied, "but you're here, and that's where strength starts." Outside, the sun was setting, the conference room filled with amber light, warm and golden, touching everything it reached. Tomorrow would be harder, the days after even more so. But for now, we sat together in the fading light while the truth settled into place between us. The room had gone dark while we talked, neither of us bothering to turn on the lights. Outside the conference room, windows brookline settled into evening. Street lamps flickered on one by one. Headlights traced familiar patterns along the residential streets. The ordinary rhythm of a Thursday night, as if the world hadn't just fractured and reformed in the space of one afternoon. Noelle's hand still rested in mine. Her grip had strengthened slightly, no longer just holding on, but actually present. "Tell me the rest," she said quietly. "All of it, from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the first login attempt I'd noticed 6 months ago, the anomaly in the access logs that shouldn't have been there, how I'd traced it back to Bryce's laptop through the home network we all shared. the sick certainty that had settled in my stomach when I realized what he was trying to access. I could have confronted him then, I said. Should have, maybe. But something stopped me. What? You. I squeezed her hand gently. If I'd accused him without proof, you could see what would he have told you. She was quiet for a moment. That you were jealous, that you'd never accepted him, that you were trying to control my life. Exactly. And you would have believed him because those are things daughters worry about their fathers. Because he'd spent 14 years making sure you'd believe him over anyone else. The darkness made it easier somehow, confession in shadows. Everything after that, and the fall in my office, the weakness, the meeting today, it wasn't revenge, I continued. It was the only way to protect you. I had to build a case so ironclad that when the truth came out, you couldn't doubt it. Evidence you could see, words you could hear from his own mouth. The FBI involved, so it wasn't just your father making accusations. The hard drive, she said slowly. The one he was trying to crack. You left that for him. With Silas's help, yes. A trap that documented every desperate attempt, every moment of his guilt. And the meeting, you staged all of it. I orchestrated it, I corrected gently. But everything that happened was real. His crimes were real. His confession was real. That audio recording, those were his actual words to Saskia. I didn't put words in his mouth. I just created circumstances where he'd say them out loud. Noelle pulled her hand back, but not in anger. She pressed both palms against her eyes. If you just had him arrested without all this, you would have defended him, hired lawyers, believed his explanations, and he would have used that loyalty to manipulate you into helping him even unknowingly. I would have lost you trying to save you. So you let me see the monster myself. I let you see the truth yourself. There's a difference. She lowered her hands. In the dim light from the street lamps outside, her face looked younger somehow, softer. The defensive hardness I'd seen for the past year had finally cracked. I'm sorry, I said, for the deception, for letting you believe I was failing when I wasn't, for every moment you worried about me when the worry was manufactured. But not for the rest of it. No, not for protecting you the only way I knew how. Corinne appeared in the doorway. She didn't ask if she could join. She just moved quietly into the room and sat down beside her daughter. My wife had been present during the confrontation earlier, standing in the corner, with Desmond watching everything unfold. We'd discussed the plan weeks ago, every detail, every risk. She'd been the one to insist we move forward despite the danger, despite knowing it would devastate Noelle in the short term. Mom, Noelle said, and her voice broke slightly on the word. Corinne Prescott, 63 years old, mother and grandmother, and the steady heartbeat of this family, for 4 decades reached for her daughter's hand. She didn't speak immediately, just held on. I saw him, Corinne said finally. 3 days before your wedding, I came by your apartment to drop off the altered hem on your dress, and you were out running errands. He said he'd take the dress for you. I saw him going through your purse on the kitchen counter. Noelle went very still. He heard me come in and stopped, made some excuse about looking for your phone to call you. But I knew, I felt it, something wrong in how quickly he smiled, how smoothly he lied. Why didn't you say anything? Noelle's voice was barely audible. I tried. The morning of the wedding, I asked if you were certain, if you'd seen anything that worried you. You laughed and said I was just having mother of the bride nerves. Corinne's own voice wavered. I should have pushed harder, should have told you what I saw instead of asking vague questions. I've carried that for 14 years. You couldn't have known. I knew something was wrong, and I stayed silent because I didn't want to be the controlling mother-in-law. Didn't want you to resent me for ruining your wedding day over a feeling. 14 years of holding everything in. 14 years of not being allowed to break. You tried to protect me, Noelle whispered. Both of you tried. We failed, Corinne said. For 14 years we failed. No, Noelle shook her head. You didn't fail. You couldn't save me from something I didn't want to be saved from. The truth of that settled between all 3 of us. How do you rescue someone who doesn't believe they're drowning, who's convinced the water is just fine, the undertow, just their imagination? He took so much, Noelle said. Time, trust. He took who I was and turned it into something useful for him. Corinne pulled her daughter close. Not the polite embrace of social occasions, but the fierce hold of a mother who'd watched her child hurt for years and been powerless to stop it. You get to decide who you are now, she said into Noelle's hair. Not him, not what he did. You. And finally, Noelle cried. Not the silent tears from earlier, real sobs that shook her whole body. 14 years of grief and rage and betrayal pouring out in the darkness of the conference room that had hosted so many careful, controlled meetings. She leaned into her mother and cried for a very long time, and for the first time in 14 years, she didn't stop herself. Adrienne spread the legal documents across her desk 4 weeks after the arrest. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of her Boston office, illuminating neat rows of case files and legal precedents. Everything in Adrienne Dalton's world existed in careful order: crimes, documented charges, filed, justice methodically pursued. 12 to 15 years, federal prison. She said, her finger tracing down the sentencing recommendation. Multiple counts, consecutive sentencing. Medical data fraud, conspiracy to commit theft of intellectual property, illegal financial transactions with a foreign entity. I sat across from her, Desmond to my right. The relief should have felt larger. Instead, it settled quietly like dust after a long storm. Genome Corp International, Desmond asked. Under federal investigation, accounts frozen permanently. The organization's essentially been dismantled. Adrienne flipped to another document. Saskia Harlow accepted a plea agreement, 8 years full cooperation. Her testimony about the blackmail will be part of Bryce's trial. And Noel, I asked. Adrienne's expression softened slightly. The marital assets are protected. Everything's been legally structured to ensure she paused, glancing at her notes. She won't lose anything. The house, the accounts, everything Bryce claimed was joint property. It's all secured for her. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding that worry until it released. Bryce had taken 14 years from my daughter. He wouldn't take her financial security too. Gene Trust, I asked. Completely secure. New systems, new protocols, comprehensive security upgrade. Adrienne smiled faintly. Conrad's team did a full vulnerability assessment. 200,000 DNA records, all protected. Better than they were before, actually. Desmond leaned back in his chair. So it's over. The criminal case moves forward, but yes, the threat is contained. The damage is stopped. Adrienne closed the file folder with a quiet finality. You protected what needed protecting, Leland. I thought about Noelle, who'd spent the past month staying in her old bedroom at our house, who moved through the days quietly, like someone relearning how to inhabit her own life, who'd filed for divorce 2 days after Bryce's arrest, and hadn't mentioned his name since. Not everything I said. Not soon enough. You can't save people from choices they're determined to make, Adrienne replied. You can only be there when they're ready to choose differently. We left her office with folders full of documentation, legal closure in paper form, justice served measured in years, and frozen accounts and federal charges. It still felt incomplete. A month later, Noelle appeared at the door, carrying something I hadn't seen in 14 years. The molecular biology textbook was weathered now, its spine cracked from use margins filled with her precise handwriting. She'd carried it through graduate school, through her first research position, through all the years before Bryce convinced her that science was too demanding, too isolating, too incompatible with the life he wanted them to build. I kept it, she said, standing in our front hallway. I don't know why. I packed it away when we moved into the house he chose, put it in a box in the basement. Found it yesterday. Corinne appeared from the kitchen, saw what Noelle was holding, and quietly retreated. Some conversations needed space. Come with me, I said. I led her through the house to the small lab I'd built decades ago when Noelle was still in high school. The room where she'd first learned to pipette samples to read gel electrophoresis, results to fall in love with the precise language of DNA. I hadn't changed anything in 14 years. The equipment was updated periodically, kept functional. The workspace remained organized. But the fundamental space, the essence of it, stayed exactly as she'd left it. I switched on the light. Noelle stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving across the familiar benches, the centrifuge, the microscope she'd used for her undergraduate thesis. Her hand touched the counter lightly, as if testing whether it was real. Is it too late? She asked, her voice barely audible. To turn back, to try again, to return to science, to return to myself. Some doors close. Some stay open for 14 years waiting. I walked to the entrance and placed my hand on the small brass plaque mounted beside the doorframe. The metal had aged to a soft patina, but the engraved letters remained sharp and clear. Your name is still on the door, I said. Noelle moved closer, her textbook still clutched against her chest. She stared at the plaque. Dr. Noelle Prescott, molecular biologist. her maiden name, her identity from before Bryce, before the 14 years that had rewritten everything she thought she knew about herself. The title she'd earned at 22, bright and ambitious and absolutely certain that science was where she belonged. I never took it down, I said quietly. Every time I came in here to update equipment or review research, I saw your name. Corinne suggested removing it once years ago, said it might be too painful to keep looking at, but I couldn't. Why not? Because taking it down would have meant accepting that you weren't coming back, that the daughter who used to spend 16-hour days in this lab chasing breakthrough discoveries was gone forever. I touched the edge of the plaque. I refused to accept that. Noelle set the textbook down on the nearest bench. Her fingers traced the engraved letters of her name, the name she'd stopped using when she married Bryce, when she'd become Mrs. Whitfield, and gradually stopped being Dr. Prescott. 14 years, she whispered. You're still here, I said. Everything he took the time, the identity, the life you thought you'd build, he took the years. He didn't take you. You're still here. She pressed her palm flat against the plaque, covering her name completely. Then slowly she pulled her hand away and looked at the letters again. I don't know if I remember how, she said. It's been so long. The field has changed. I've changed. Then you learn again. Start where you are, not where you were. What if I fail? Then you fail at something that matters to you instead of succeeding at something that doesn't. The lab smelled faintly of ethanol and the particular sterile cleanliness of scientific spaces. Light from the window caught the microscope's glass, throwing small rainbows across the white walls. Noelle touched the letters of her name again and didn't say anything for a long time. She didn't have to. 3 months later, I found myself standing in the doorway of Gene Trust's main research lab, watching my daughter work. Noelle didn't look up when I entered. Too focused on the microscope slide, her posture bent in that familiar way I remembered from years ago. Shoulders slightly forward, left hand adjusting the fine focus with minute precision. Right hand poised over her notebook. April sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air, turning everything golden. Outside, Cambridge was waking up to spring. Inside, my daughter was waking up to herself. Don't let me interrupt, I said quietly from the doorway. She smiled without breaking concentration. You're not, I'm just working. Those 4 words carried more weight than she probably realized. Just working, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if she'd never spent 14 years convinced that working meant abandoning everything else that mattered. She'd started 2 weeks ago, not as my successor, not as the heir apparent to Gene Trust's future, just as a researcher relearning techniques she'd left behind, catching up on 14 years of advancement in molecular biology, rebuilding the foundation she'd walked away from. Some days were harder than others. Some days she'd stand in the lab, looking lost, overwhelmed by how much had changed. Other days like today, she'd sink into the work and hours would vanish. I watched her make a notation, adjust the slide, lean back in to observe. The movements were coming back. Muscle memory, recovering what the mind had tried to forget. I'm heading out, I said. Lock up when you're done. Will do. She glanced up briefly, meeting my eyes. Thanks, Dad. For what? For leaving the light on. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and left her to her work. At home, I found Corinne in the kitchen preparing dinner. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if something heavy that had been pressing down on all of us for years had finally lifted. She's still there, I said, setting my briefcase down. 9 o'clock and she'll still be at that microscope. Corinne smiled. Like old times. Better than old times. This time she chose it. My wife moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, chopping vegetables for a salad. We'd been married 41 years. I'd watched her navigate countless difficult situations with grace and strength. But these past 3 months had revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated before: her capacity for growth. I wrote to Saskia, she said without preamble. I paused. When? Last week. Send it to the federal facility where she's serving her sentence. What did you say? Corinne set down the knife, her hands resting on the counter. The truth. Not forgiveness, she hasn't asked for that, and I'm not ready to offer it. But the truth about her mother, about what really happened all those years ago. Saskia Harlow had built her entire criminal justification on a lie that her mother, Sandra, had been wrongfully fired from Gene Trust, that my family had destroyed hers. The reality was more complicated. Sandra had been terminated for repeatedly violating patient confidentiality protocols. We'd kept the details private to protect her reputation. She deserves to know, Corinne continued. The real story, not the version she's been carrying, if she wants it. Have you heard back? Not yet. Maybe I won't. But after 14 years of staying silent to keep peace, I'm learning when to speak. 14 years she'd been gone. 1 month she'd been back. The math didn't matter anymore. I thought about all the silences we'd kept, all the truths we'd held back because the timing wasn't right, because the cost seemed too high, because speaking meant risking everything we were trying to protect. Like, you did the right thing, I said. Corinne looked at me, her eyes bright. So did you. That evening I returned to the lab. Not to check on Noelle, she was an adult capable of managing her own time, just to finish some paperwork in my office. But when I arrived, I found myself standing at the window overlooking the main research floor instead. Noelle was still there, still at the microscope. The building had gone quiet around her. Other researchers departed for the day, but she remained, lost in the work, found in the work. 26 years I'd spent building Gene Trust from nothing, creating something meaningful, protecting 200,000 people's most intimate genetic information, building systems and protocols and security measures to ensure their trust was never violated. 14 years, I'd watched my daughter drift away piece by piece, while a man with dead eyes and perfect manners systematically dismantled everything she was. 3 months I'd spent setting the trap, building the case, orchestrating the confrontation that would either save her or lose her forever. How do you measure the weight of protecting someone against the cost of letting them fall? Was it worth it? The deception? The risk? The moment when I'd watched Bryce reduce 14 years of her life to a single brutal metaphor. I looked at my daughter, finally herself again, and knew the answer. The office was dark except for the glow from the research floor below. I didn't turn on the lights, just stood there watching Noelle work, this woman who carried my genetics and her mother's strength and her own particular brilliance, that nothing, not betrayal, not 14 years of manipulation, not the devastating truth of what she'd endured could permanently extinguish. She made another notation in her notebook, switched slides, adjusted the focus. Simple actions, ordinary research, the kind of work that happens in laboratories around the world every day. Except this wasn't ordinary. This was resurrection. This was a woman reclaiming her name one microscope slide at a time. I thought about what Desmond had said months ago when I'd first outlined the plan. You're risking everything on the chance she'll see the truth. He'd been right. It had been a risk. A calculated gamble that undeniable evidence and Bryce's own words would break through 14 years of manipulation. But standing here now, watching my daughter work in the lab, where her name had waited on a brass plaque for 14 years, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. It wasn't about forcing her to see the truth. It was about keeping the light on, about refusing to accept that the person she'd been was gone forever, about maintaining the space where she could return if she ever found her way back. Sometimes to protect the people you love, you have to let them walk through the darkness themselves, but you never ever turn off the light. And to you listening to my story, remember this. If I could go back, I wouldn't change the outcome, but I'd trust my instincts sooner. When something feels wrong in your family, it probably is. Don't make my mistake of waiting months to act. But when you do act, make sure the truth is undeniable. That's the only way through family betrayal. This family betrayal taught me something I'll carry forever. You cannot save someone from a truth they refuse to see. When family betrayal cuts this deep, when someone you've welcomed into your family story for 14 years turns out to be a stranger, you have to let them witness the evidence themselves. No amount of telling would have convinced my daughter. She had to hear his own words. I believe God's timing brought everything together at exactly the right moment, even though waiting was agony. The lesson isn't just about exposing betrayal. It's about keeping the light on while someone you love walks through darkness. If this family story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my position. Would you have confronted him immediately, or would you have set the trap as I did? If you know someone facing their own difficult family story, please share this with them. And if you'd like more stories like this, please subscribe to Revenge Dad. Thank you for staying until the very end. As always, some details have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling, but the heart of this message about protection, truth, and keeping the light burning, that's real.